Hello, I wrote a tune on the keyboard this morning and I'm going to play it, and it's going to be the theme song to this video. Okay. Hi. Welcome to the best of 2020 video that I have made, or I'm making now. It's long overdue. I should have done it in January. It's now March. Wait, April. God damn it, it's April. It's 18 days into April. I should know it's April. I am sitting in the music room in my house, which is a bedroom that was until recently occupied. It's got a keyboard in it and a couch and some boxes. I've moved most of the pickup instruments, the instruments you can pick up, so that means guitars and like toy drums and stuff that I found lying around, behind the curtain, so I have a clear floor space. The microphone is currently on a tiny wooden garden table because I've been using that to store things next to the keyboard. And yeah, that's where I am right now. I'm gonna move this onto the floor maybe. I'll just move this so I can sit. I'm moving the piano stool. It is very unprofessional of me. Oh well. I knocked the microphone. That's gonna stay in. I'm not gonna edit this as almost at all. So get ready for a fun auditory ride of bad stuff happening to the microphone. Yeah, I like this room. It's hard to describe it. It's got a big sloped roof, which means the acoustics aren't actually the best. But I can't record in my room right now because my little brother's room is opposite, and he's going to bed listening to a Lonely Planet Spanish CD, so it would get in the way of the recording. I would sit on the couch, but I think it would make bad sounds while I was recording. And also, no, actually, there's not an also. I just wanted to say, I was thinking about saying it earlier, the couch, when we got it, most of the stuff in this room is either we've had for a while. The only new thing is like the keyboard. We bought that late last year. But most things in this room we've just gotten over a really long period of time. The couch we got for pretty cheap off the Facebook marketplace, but we got it from this kind of terrifying house. It was in one of those kind of rich mansion suburbs which seem to spring up occasionally, kind of a little way out from the city. They're not out in the rural areas, but you go into them and the houses are these big kind of looming like new age mausoleums where you can go to die in your money. But also there's like, you can't hear any birds. There's no sound in those neighborhoods. You get occasionally sort of an echoing rumble of a car in the distance, but there's really not much going on. We pulled up to this house and we went inside to pick up the couch. And it was on the second floor. But so we went in the ground floor and there was a spiral staircase immediately in the lobby that led up to the second floor. And we walked up there and the house was just empty. The house these two people lived in, it was a wife and a husband. It was very empty. There was no rugs. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a model house you'd walk into if you were looking to buy. And there was a mirror, a mirror in a very ornate gold frame in the lobby, and nothing else really. And the floors were very shiny and the walls were clear white plaster. We accidentally scraped the plaster on one of the walls when we were bringing the couch down. The husband got kind of annoyed about it, which made me feel kind of worried. But on the second floor when we were up there, I kind of looked around within reason, in the rooms that we were in, to get the couch. And on the second story, in the small living room kind of annex we got the couch from, there was the couch, obviously, but there was also a TV on a kind of wooden TV stand. And it was attached to a PS3, which was probably only being used as a DVD player, but I think there might have been a game with it too. And what I remember, though, is the only DVD I could see, or the one that was on top of the pile, was a self-defense training DVD. So it was just these two people living in this empty house. One of them is learning self-defense in a cold white room. I don't know. It's a weird place. It made me feel strange. Anyway, we're 6 minutes in and I haven't talked about anything on topic. But I have played you a song and talked about a place I went to. So I feel like, that fits. Anyway, the order I am going to bring up all the drawings I have done for this project. So I'm going to run you through how this works for me. I've done a drawing for all of the entries on this list except for one. And that will become clear when I come to it. Or the reason for that will become clear when I come to it. And I've written notes on all the music because it's kind of hard to recollect music from my head. While I was doing the drawings, I listened to music from the source, or from the media I'm talking about. And I'm going to take all but for the games and for the movies and for the books, I have written no notes. And the only thing I'm allowed to look at while I talk about it for reference, for talking points, is my drawings. So that's possibly going to present challenges for me, but I think it'll be fun. I tried to draw my drawings in a way that contained sort of visual notes for myself, almost. And I think I'll have enough to talk about with everything. I'm sort of worrying about the mic quality now. I'm going to take just a second to see if I can fix the acoustics. Hi, I relocated to my bedroom, so there should be much better acoustics now. And there isn't any background noise. So, cool, I can start recording proper now. I'm going to take off these headphones because they don't actually help me at all right now. And I can hear the sound of my voice just fine. So, in order, the sections of this video are 1. Music, 2. Video games, 3. Books, 4. Films. This isn't in any specific order. Within categories, there's no ranking. And there's no specific reason for the order of music, video games, books, and then films. I think music is first because I listen to music more than I play video games, read books, or watch films. But if I actually was ordering the whole list in terms of the amount I interact with that media form, it would be music, films, video games, books. And I want to read more books and maybe play the same amount of video games. I don't play that many, but I like the amount I play, and I feel like I get a lot out of each game because of it. Maybe not, I don't know. Do I have anything else to say? Yeah, I guess this is a video coming out of 2020. I think everybody's aware of how 2020 was, and I don't mean to gesture vaguely at something that was a real tragedy for a lot of people and the horrors of which continue, but also I'm not sure if I can say anything new. I just hope you're safe. I hope if you're not safe, you find the ability to become safe soon. Yeah, I'm sorry if it's been pretty okay for me. My state has handled some things well. Lockdowns went okay, and I'm privileged enough to be in a position where it didn't affect me that greatly. I don't work. I don't have a job. I'm still in high school, and I was a motivated enough student to keep going through online schooling. So it didn't affect me that much, but yeah, some people have had a really terrible run of it, and I guess I'm trying to put empathy out there. Yeah, I don't know. I shouldn't say I don't know in a reaction to something like this, but yeah, I feel I have to say something. I can't gloss over it, but by the same token, I'm not sure exactly what to say. I don't have anything new to say. Not that there needs to be something new said into response to this. You get it. You get it. I hope you you take my talking about it as genuine and not as fumbling over a serious topic. But who knows? I'm sorry. Okay, let's start talking about music. I don't have any transitions or anything. So the first on my list of music is Zack Villere's album Cardboard City, which was one of my favorites of last year. All of this stuff, sorry, I should probably say, this stuff is not necessarily released last year. It's more stuff I first came into contact with last year, or really cemented itself as one of my favorites last year in retrospect. I know that's a very loose ruling, and a lot of other people would stick it to strictly 2020, or strictly things I first interacted with in 2020, but I don't see the exact point in that, because that kind of restricts the list, and there's not even, I don't feel like I interact with enough good stuff from any given year to fill out a list in any meaningful way. And plus, it wouldn't act as a representation of my taste in that year, and that's more what I'm going for. This is a running log of my opinions and feelings on things that I can come back to at later points in my life and look back and kind of understand where I was at. And the creative component gives me an avenue to kind of show what I'm doing creatively to a future version of myself, you know. Okay, the first one is Cardboard City by Zack Villere, which is a really fantastic album. I think something that really caught me about it, or really grabbed me initially, was how slice of lifey it is in a lot of its lyrical content. You've got a lot of flashing around different points in Zack's life, and his lyricism rides the kind of fine line of being goofy and sincere without sounding badly made. He writes really well, and I feel like he always gets across what he wants to say, but he does it in a way that feels very relatable and very human. And I think that's extremely difficult to do in a way that people aren't usually given credit for. I don't quite have the knack for it, I don't think. It's something I have to work on. It's something I feel like he's worked on a lot, maybe. It's really great. I'm looking at my notes on the album as I'm reading this. I've written, the autobiographical songwriting matches my interest in the lives of other people and always feels genuine. Despite being candid, it never trips over itself or feels overly simple. So that's half of what I've said there. But yeah, the slice of life nature. I'm interested by the lives of other people. I'm interested by autobiography and people telling stories about their own lives. I'm not sure when I started being interested in it exactly, but I don't know, there's something, I start hearing about the lives of other people and I get really hungry for details. I want to know about it. I want to hear what's been going on for them. I want to know how their life unfolded, what got them to the point they're at, how they feel about stuff. I don't do it to the people around me because I don't want to be demanding, but I think, yeah, I'd like to just read more. I wish there were more biographies of people who aren't extremely famous or important. There probably are, and I just need to find them. But I'd like to read those, I think. Also, Cowboy City helped me get through some parts of last year. Not that I felt hugely depressed or anything, or I felt really upset all the time, but it's kind of uplifting. It's a very uplifting album, actually. It came out at a kind of bleak time for a lot of people, and it feels it feels a lot like connection with other people, and you listen to it and there's the voices of other people, and there's people talking about events occurring and then them traveling places, and you feel like, oh, okay, the outer world still exists. The album title is Cardboard City, and it really does feel like a whole city. You've got these suburban areas and then city in the center, and everything scattered side to side. There's so many standout tracks in it too. I think I like every track. Even the skits I think are pretty fun. But stuff like Haircut, which has this kind of recurring vocal sample that gets louder and louder throughout the mix, is really great and sticks in my head. And I find myself less singing along to the melody and more singing along to this one kind of warped vocal sample. I also really love Sore Throat, which was one of the lead singles. I love the kind of sharp synth that rides over the top of slightly woozy guitar chords. I think I'm going to read through my notes a little bit and just go through them in order. The way Zack matches tonal and atonal elements is fantastic. It's super melodic music, but I never feel like I'm getting tired of it. Yeah. I have this thing with music. If a song is super based on melody and harmony and it's really catchy, I will love it extremely for a little while, and then I will throw it away. Like, I won't be able to listen to it. I can't write music that's too melodic because I end up looping the music a lot while I'm making it, and I end up feeling actually physically ill. Like, I don't know why I'm like this, but music for me has to have an atonal element to keep it grounded and to allow me to repeat listens. So in the most traditional sense, that's drums, but I don't think a track could just rely on having drums as the atonal element, because that's too little, unless the drums are really, really complex. The Cardboard City somehow almost entirely sidesteps this problem for me. The music is very melodic and it's got very catchy hooks and melodies, but it also has enough interesting sampling and moments where it kind of breaks up and filters in and out of itself, that it maintains the atonality in a way without losing the melody. It's really hard to describe without saying it. That's going to go for or listening to it, that's going to go for the whole music section. It's hard to describe a sound with my mouth, and I can't really remember it off the top of my head, sing it or anything, but that's great. I've got some water next to me, so you're going to have to listen to me drink at some point, because this is already getting raw in my throat, and I've done barely any talking today. What have I done today? Today I have produced music, and I have helped cut the heads off all the agapanthus going down the driveway. So I haven't talked that much, and my throat's already getting raw. Speaking of throats, or sore throats, the music video for Sore Throat, which is the lead single I mentioned earlier, is fantastic. It's one of my favorite music videos I've seen in a really long time, and I really like music videos. I love the kind of... There's a shot of an intersection from above as the traffic lights change, and the cars start moving, and the people start moving across the crosswalk. And by looking down on it, you're shown kind of a secret, almost, it feels secret, pattern to the movement of people, this gridded lines they're moving on. And that's just how the city has developed, and that's how people have developed to move in cities, or maybe people have developed the methods of moving in cities to make things more orderly, but then you get to see from top down the results of that order, and it's this strange thing. It looks weird. It's surprising to see orderly motion like that from people, because you don't necessarily think of the order of people in a crowd, the movement of people in a crowd, as orderly. And I guess that's what crowd dynamics is about, but I don't know much about that, and maybe I should look into it. The cinematographer for that video is brilliant, and I cannot find any information about them online, which sucks. It's directed by Zack, Villere, and Dan Street. I've looked at Dan Street's other projects, and I didn't like them all that much. And yeah. Okay, thank you, but I'm recording right now. sorry about that. I'll probably try to cut that, but if I don't, oh well, that's reality. It's reality sneaking into the elaborate fiction of the recording. There is no elaborate fiction here. If I tried to do an elaborate fiction, I'd end up feeling like I'm lying. Anyway, yeah, so the director of that music video, I don't like his other projects that much, so I think a lot of the lead comes from Zack Villere as the co-director, but I think it comes down a lot to that cinematographer. And I've searched him up, I've searched for IMDb credits, I've searched all over the place, and I can't find any other projects by him, so that's surprising. I'd love to know more about their work. It would be amazing. Yeah. Oh, I've got some notes here about certain parts from the album I like. I love the sharp synths over Sore Throat, which I mentioned. The vocal chopping in The Grateful. Yeah, that's great. He takes I am so grateful, and then he just chops up like the last syllable and starts playing a different melody on it. And it's the sort of thing that I at least imagine while I'm making a song, but can't get to sound quite right. And he does it flawlessly, and it's fantastic, and it made me beam the first time I heard it. Yeah, every song is so distinct. Even the background elements feel super in focus. It's not muddied at all, despite having like a fair bit going on and some nice textures at points. I don't know. It's just really well done. It's a super well-made album. Every song is interesting and relatable, and the production is fantastic, and it feels very personal in ways, and that travels across to how the music is constructed. It's a really unique style. It's got elements from a whole bunch of places, but it's definitely its own thing. What other notes do I have? The vocals sound great, both in how they're recorded and how they're sung. All of the sounds are super full, even when there's not an enormous amount going on. There's always this kind of blue-black dusk color gradient. So what I mean by that last line is... what I mean is, songs have a kind of a color to them, like a background color. And elements on top of it have their own colors, but they kind of bleed out those colors of the top elements and form this background color. And at the time of writing, the notes in which I was listening to the album, I felt like that background was this kind of blue to black dusk gradient, which is something I really like. It's a gradient of colors, the one you see just before it to night, where the sky is this super rich blue for a period of maybe 10 minutes, and everything else is silhouetted. And I've been trying to capture that color in some way, and I tried to capture it kind of in Casadastra, and I'm trying to capture it kind of in the game that I'm playing in my head right now. And I can't do it. I can't do it right. So, hi, I'm back. Sorry, there was actually a good few minutes pause there. I went and talked to Mum about the dogs and how she was, because she did mosaicing tonight, which she does weekly with a friend or two, and about maybe having a bonfire of the agapanthus heads we cut today, along with some tree branches we cut, which would be really nice. We'll do that tomorrow probably, and tomorrow's the last day of my school holidays, so it'll be a nice way to kind of send it off, I guess. I feel like I've been acting weird so far. I've been trying to be kind of overly presentational rather than conversational, and that stops things flowing well or sounding nice to listen to. The notes are kind of clunky, I'll admit it. But, they're good also to structure my thoughts in a way or cover everything I want to cover. Let's get back to it. Cowboy City. So Cowboy City is the second sort of major Zack Villere album, I guess. You have Little World first, which is also really, really good. But Little World felt like Zack doing a guitar album, and Cowboy City kind of covertly feels like a piano album. the piano is at the back of almost every song, I think, and it's really well composed. I'm always surprised by how a lot of musicians can just transition from instruments to instrument, or they'll just pick up an instrument and they'll start making cool stuff on it. Like I probably couldn't make a lot of the piano parts of these songs, and I guess it's just experience, but his previous projects, I guess they have digital keys in them, so it's not that much of a step up. But you know, live piano is still tricky. You got to get the whole hand coordination thing. As someone who plays keyboard, I don't know, it just really impresses me when people can transfer over instruments like that. Zack's upcoming music, he's released 3 singles, For the Rest of My Life, Bernadette, and Causeway, which are all pretty good. Anyway, those singles, that new music, seems even more acoustic than Cardboard City. So Little World was more digitized than Cardboard City, and the new stuff is even less digitized than Cardboard City. I did that badly, but it's been getting less and less digitized over time. Yeah, I'm interested to see where it goes, but I certainly trust his style after Little World and Cardboard City, because they're both fantastic, and I think I trust his music enough to think that it'll go somewhere good with it. Anyway, that's all I had to say. I think it's a really fantastic album, and you should try listening to it if you want. Next, I'm going to try and move to the next one quicker. Next up is Man Alive by King Krule, which is so good. I can't just say they're all so good, because everything on here, almost everything, is so good. But I started listening to King Krule earlier this year, I think. And I didn't immediately fall in love, but then I did. And that's a good sign. That means it took me a little bit to push into it, because if I really quickly get something, that often means it'll fade off on me. But King Krule, I think it took me a sec to push into, and now I love it. Both The Ooze, which is his 2017 album, and Man Alive, which is 2020 album, are really, really good. I'm just going to read through my notes in order this time, because I think it'll be less awkward. Compared to The Ooze, Man Alive's saxophone is a lot more restrained, joining and punctuating the ambient soundscape. Okay, so on The Ooze is a lot more bombastic at points. It's a lot longer, but not in a bad way. I've found people criticizing its length, and that I disagree. I think every track on it covers some similar material, but it covers it from different enough angles that it always sounds good. But yeah, the saxophone on The Ooze is often kind of playing these accompaniments to the main guitar, or really carrying the climax of a song. Whereas on Man Alive, it's more drifting and in the ambience and jumping out of it sometimes, or peeking up out of it. And it works really well in that position. It feels like, I don't want to use the word mature here, because King Krule's music had already matured completely by the time of The Ooze, and continues to kind of ripen almost, which is also the wrong phrase. Finding the right adjective descriptors for music is really hard, and I spend a lot of time on it when I'm sitting down and writing stuff about music. But I can't do it here because I'm thinking of it, so I'll just have to make do, and you'll have to forgive me for not having a perfectly built up library of adjectives to describe music yet. One day I'll be much, much better at it, I hope. I get better at it all the time I do it. But yeah, the saxophone is more restrained, and it works really well. It gives the album a more quiet, kind of transitional feel. The Ooze felt very cathartic, whereas Man Alive feels a little more kind of in itself. I don't know if that makes much sense. I'm going to restrain also from saying I don't know if that makes much sense, because if I'm listening in future, and if you listen to the albums, which maybe you should do. You don't have to if you're listening to this. But hey, this is a recommendation video, so if anything catches your attention, you might want to. Yeah, you should go to it. Maybe I should give an introduction. Man Alive is the second or third King Krule album. There's one EP by Archie Marshall as King Krule, though he's released a lot of other music. He has a really deep, kind of rough voice at points. His vocals are quite beautiful at points and quite rough at others. He has a real knack for creating sort of atmosphere, a very palpable sense of location within songs in a lot of them, especially on the Ooze, I feel like. The song The Locomotive especially, it's just black as night, train tracks and kind of abandonment. I find a lot of his music very, very cathartic, I think. The way he roars vocals at points and the way he kind of chunders over himself, but it never feels dull in its catharsis. It feels honest. And I worry sometimes catharsis can just be people wanting something out of them, wanting to get rid of it by all means necessary. So they make this kind of art that doesn't resonate with me. And I'm not going to call it bad art, because that's so presumptuous to call anything immediately bad art. But sometimes I feel like catharsis is too quickly gone to resolution, too quickly found in created works just because people want that, even if it's not necessarily good for them, or if it's not necessarily good for the work. And I never feel that in King Krule. I feel it feels very cathartic to listen to, but it feels also honest. It doesn't feel in any way like it's going to trick you, or it's trying to trick you. Okay, second note. The album's got a very drifty feeling. The opening moves to a beat. Yeah, okay, so the opening moves to a beat like someone running angry, but then the night sky has the calm set in and it smooths out. The downwards pressure becomes a kind of consistency, maybe exhaustion is comfort. I feel like I misinterpret the album here. It's overly simple and overly personal analysis. I think something new should come from an album when you analyze it, otherwise you're just looking into yourself, which is useful too, but different. Okay, I'm covering a lot of leg room in this note. The album kind of has two halves. It's got a first half which is more heavy, beat heavy, and has more drums, and kind of a bit more and much more aggressive. And it moves into a second half where it kind of spaces out and it warbles on. And then the last track feels almost like a synthesis of the kind of grime and aggression of the first tracks and the atmosphere of the later ones. The last track always blindsides me. It kind of comes out of nowhere. It's really surprising. It's got such a different mood. Yeah, but my analysis of the album is talking about how that overall sense of change in mood feels like sort of the anger moving into just exhaustion at the end of it, and then by the end of it kind of collapsing. And again, I said it's overly personal, because I can see all the elements of that analysis are coming from inside me and inside my own experience, where I feel like any really good analysis of any piece of work should have some of you in it. That's very, very hard to avoid, but also a lot of the work telling you things. Like, you should be hearing new things come out of you that you don't know the input for, or you don't know the origin of, and it's kind of putting stuff together and spitting it out in a weird way. Again, it's hard to reach that point with analysis unless something's really, really unique. I'm not saying King Krule isn't, but I don't know, my analysis there isn't refined enough. Third note. I love the atmosphere the album builds. Car sounds, phone calls, it flows in and out of each other. It's thick, alternating between cool and warm breezes. This is more atmospheric writing. But yeah, there's a lot of use of atmospheric detail, and as I said earlier, it builds a real sense of place throughout it. King Krule seems to have a soft spot for starting songs with phone calls, which make them feel like a transmission from somewhere else, somewhere calling out to you, and telling you a story. And the cool and warm breezes, yeah, it's very breezy. It's very nocturnal album, and it alternates though in tones of that nighttime. It's The next note I've written says it's not one note though. There are a lot of feelings that come in at other points, and the first third has a different edge to the rest of it. Anything I feel says a little reductive, so I think you should just listen. Yeah, listen to the album. If you like the way I talk about it at all, listen to the album. It's better than me talking about it, because it's the actual thing that I'm talking about. Marshall's lyricism is great. There's a lot of great evocative writing. I end up with a lot of pictures in my head as I listen. The word for that is pictorial. It's a word I love, but I think I already wrote it somewhere else in my notes, so I didn't let myself use it again. The song Energy Fleets on here is fantastic. I like to play some parts of it on guitar, but I'm bad at it because I don't really know how to play guitar, and I haven't learnt properly, and I just like messing around on it. So one day maybe I'll put serious work into practicing it. The on Energy Fleets there's a lyric which is pretty simple. It says, "It's such a funny life, such a funny life I lead. I sit and soaking in the times." I added more in my notes. I've just got "It's such a funny life," but the conviction with which it's sung really stands out to me, and it feels very emotional every time I listen to it. It's kind of an acceptance or a humorous looking at your own life and just feeling okay with it, like okay with all the stuff that happens. It's such a funny life. It's so interesting. It's it's just really nice. The lyricism is great. It's kind of buried a little, and I feel like on first listen you might not feel it as much, but I think it's everything that it needs to be, and it doesn't overextend itself in a lot of places. It feels very perfect, very, again, refined. The Ooze was a 19-track album. The Man Alive is a lot less than that. It feels like a further refining of a style. Like if the Ooze brought it all out and laid it all out on the table, Man Alive takes the bits that are great and pushes it in together into this very refined package. That's just different ways of doing stuff. There's plenty of interesting electronic additions on top of the guitar, but it's all understated and complementary. I think this is, for the result, difficult to do. That's a really badly written note. But what I'm saying is there is electronic production here, and you might be tricked into thinking there isn't, which is great. The electronic elements in the mix all assist the other instruments so perfectly that you don't immediately suss them out as electronic. There's a real naturalness to their position within the rest of the music, which is great. It's so rare that you get someone who can marry electronic and, physical instruments so well. There's the kind of, similar texture to all of it, and that's really, really hard to pull off. It's amazing. It's just amazing work. Yeah, it requires a really good understanding, both of, I think, just the way everything sounds and fits together, but also of the overall atmosphere and texture you want to create, and the emotion of every instrument, and then you're building things with the same emotion on top of each other and around each other and in the same texture and sound ranges, and it's kind of immaculate work that doesn't draw attention to itself. I think when we think of the word immaculate in terms of work, we're often thinking of something very glossy, like that kind of PC music production style. I'm not talking about that. So immaculate then is the wrong word, but it's very purposeful and extremely well done. The guitar is pretty great too. It always suits the mood. It has a sort of it changes over the course of the album, but it has a sort of consistent delivery, like the vocals. And then I don't exactly know what I mean there in that note. And then in brackets I've written, this is vague. It's too late to get good descriptions out of me, so I was writing that late at night. Oh well. I think what I'm trying to say is the guitar has a consistent sort of mood throughout the whole album, but it has variations upon that mood. And that feels a lot like the album. It's got a consistent kind of tone to the whole thing that makes it all cohesive, but in the way good albums do, it doesn't rest upon one cohesive tone. It then observes that from different angles all the time. And the guitar does a great job of that in moving around and changing its feeling between tracks. Yeah, so the last note is, the music touches the feeling I get when I'm pent up and dried out. I want to do things that usually fill my heart with emotion, but I get there and the wind seems to blow wrong, or I forced it and it's not quite there. You just kind of got to keep going for some reason. To keep working on things, maybe? I risk sounding very cliche when I say this, but it's music that, I don't know, I guess the word for it is I find it relatable. And not in the way where I can directly relate to some of the lyrical content, but the emotion of it is something that I think rings a little deeper than... I don't know, I can't say if the intent is what I'm relating to, and that doesn't even really matter. I'm not a full proponent for Death of the Author, but I'm certainly appreciative of people bringing what they can take themselves from things. Anyway, yeah, I gotta speak faster because I'm 30 minutes into this, and I've only done 2. It touches on a feeling I get when I'm feeling bad, but in a way that feels kind of reassuring. Like, you'll get through it in a way, but not in a way that feels patronizing. I don't know. Again, listen to the music and maybe you'll get it, if you felt a similar sort of feeling. Okay, on to the next thing. I'm actually going to try and talk faster. And not literally faster, but get my point across faster. Next is Know Now by Clarence Clarity. This album is slightly annoying to me that it's on here. I have a rule that I cannot change the list after January 1st. Or I can't change the list. As soon as it rolls over into the next year, the list is unchangeable. And I don't know how Know Now got on here, because this is one of those albums, like I was talking about earlier, which I loved, and then I fell off of hard, and I came back on it, and I loved it again. And I guess in December, when I was writing my end of the year notes, I was like, oh, no, now I'll put this on here, and maybe I'll feel like leaving it, and maybe I'll feel like removing it. And then I forgot to remove it or anything, so it's on here, and it snuck under the gate, which is both kind of a bad thing and also kind of a good thing. Like, it shows the album's power, because it's an amazingly constructed album. It has some of the best pop melodies and choruses and hooks I've ever heard. It's so catchy, and it's cathartic, kind of in the way I was talking about King Krule not being. It's cathartic in that loud way. And that's how I felt about it coming into the re-listen for this project, but I kind of changed my tune on it a little bit. I'm going to read the note. This album, I would listen to this album and love it, but then fall off it hard. It's arguable this is due to heavy reliance on extremely catchy, cathartic choruses, which don't tend to stick with me. They're too blatant in flavor, so I get tired of them. Also, the album has these moments where they're just these grooves it gets into and these crazy use of samples. It's like perfect. It's such good production. It's a bunch of world music kind of exploding on top of each other. It's amazing, and it maybe shouldn't be on here. And, okay, when I started listening to it again and doing the drawing for it, I genuinely felt annoyed about it. I'm like, oh, I wish I didn't have to talk about this. I can't be as exclusively positive. I don't have as much to say about this. It's an album that's very, very catchy and very good in some ways. Like, genuinely an amazing feat of production, but it's just not quite the exact flavor of things something has to have to stick with me. But on listening to it again, I picked up more on the vocals and the actual lyrical content, which I didn't last time, and it feels like it has more depth than I actually thought it did, which is surprising because I feel like I'm usually someone who's fairly attentive of lyrics. I don't just gloss over them. Its subject material covers a lot of addiction, in this case often specifically relating to addiction to pornography, and religion. It's really harsh and hurtful at points. It's very desperate and sort of clawing and anguished. I've written, it's like looking into the pit of all the worst stuff about being a human and seeing a kind of catharsis in it. I'd argue that trying to see catharsis in torment like that is dangerous, but I really don't think the album is trying to romanticize anything. Instead, it's extremely empathetic. Yeah, it doesn't feel like an album that's trying to romanticize or make suffering seem good. It's just an album that's very good and is about suffering. And it looks at it and it goes, oh, this is awful. And it feels honest in its look at it. I feel like 2 or 3 things I've talked about right now about suffering. But, yeah. Next note. Clarence Clarity uses silence better than almost any other producer I've ever heard. It's true, yeah. The silences in this album are labored and then explode outwards or throw you for a loop by moving in the exact opposite direction you expected. It can be kind of heart-wrenchingly satisfying, which is the whole best description I can get for most of this album. It has moments of just silence where it cuts, and then it just booms outwards again. I can hear hooks in my head as I think about this. It's got this massive sort of cavernous spaces, and then they just fill in an instant. It's amazing. The sort of loudness it can get and still have kind of clarity of production, which isn't a reference to the name of the producer, Clarence Clarity. Yeah. I don't know. I might fall off this album again, but it's won me over. And for the nth time, I hope it won't be on my best of the year list again next year. Another note. At points, the vocals sound muffled in kind of a low sample range way. The song With No Fear is a good example, which often tricks my ears into thinking the whole sound is low resolution fuzzy somehow. This is a criticism. This is just a thing my ears do. Sometimes vocalists try and make their vocals sound kind of, I guess, low resolution by using a lower quality sound, and I focus quite quickly on the sound of human vocals within a mix. I think everyone does, or most people do, because our brains are trained to try and find the vocals of humans, or hear human voices. So when they're in a mix and they're low resolution, it tricks my ears into thinking the whole rest of the instrumental is low resolution, even when it's not, even when it's actually very clear. And there's better ways to muffle audio than that. I can't pick a certain one off the top of my head. I'd say the best example I can immediately give is there's some muffling that Igloo Ghost does on the Fracture Vault mini EP from last year, where it's somehow muffled and distant, but also perfectly clear at the same time. And I want to know how to do that effect because I like it a lot. And I'll have to find someone who knows how to do it so I can get them to point me in the right direction. There's a few moments in the album where it indulges in just basically being noise music, including the song Hit Factory of Sadness. I didn't used to like these, and now I think they're great. They're fun and gratifying, and they're kind of garbled, but again, they're satisfying in a way. I don't know how Clarence Clarity pulls that off. Yeah. I still feel like my talking about music is going nowhere because I can't play you any and I can't sing it off the top of my head. But yeah, it's a really good album in a lot of ways, but it also kind of irks me in a lot of ways. And I wonder if I dig into it enough times it will stop irking me and I'll just accept it as a whole, or if I'll always feel good about it and then stop liking it and then feel good about it and stop liking it again. At which point I will just probably not allow myself to listen to it because I hate being in cycles of that sort of thing with anything. And that speaks to me that in some way, even if not on purpose and even if it only happens to me because my brain moves in the way it does, it might be manipulative for me, and then I shouldn't, because it's bad to interact with anything that manipulates you, I think, in ways. So, I don't know, this might eventually become one of the albums I refuse to let myself listen to. There are several of those. The track that got me into the album was the song Those Who Can't Cheat, which is a great one to get you in because it has the kind of, at the start of it goes, the universe unfolds, and then it just goes, slams you with a wall of sound and then pulls it back and throws you into a groove. And it's like, whoa, okay, when you listen to it. And it's surprising, and it introduces you very quickly and succinctly to what the album is doing. But when I was actually listening to the album a lot, my favorite track became One Hand Washes the Other, which, I don't know, it's just, I think it has the best groove on the album. It has the best kind of beat and that rhythm that's really, really infectious. Yeah, that's the end of me talking about that album. Seems like it takes me about 10 minutes to talk about everything. What is the next thing on the music? The next thing is the lightning bolt performance of the song Dead Cowboy at Taicoclub 2014. This is one specific YouTube video of one specific band played on a specific date, and it's just such a good video. Lightning Bolt are a pair of musicians who have been making very loud rock music for a long time. I think since late 90s. They started in... It's not Providence. It's not Rhode Island. Maybe it's one of those. I can't remember. Sorry. They're a band that make loud music. The drummer, Brian Chippendale, is fantastic. The bassist, Brian Gibson, I feel like doesn't get enough credit, but it's just a bassist and a drummer, and the bass is kind of souped up in a way that makes it really heavy, and the high range is super sharp, and the low is just these deafening grumbles, or deafening rumbles, and the drumming is just... Chippendale is so fast and aggressive that his drum hits just sort of at a point, the lower level snare hits become like a torrent, and you're just hearing changes in the flowing sound, and the exclamations on that are all the other drums on the kit, all the other drums on the kit. It's just so fast. It's amazing. I love the way Chippendale plays drums. I think the story of how they met and how they learnt to play instruments is nice. Chippendale just started playing drums in a band when he was a kid. He wanted to do vocals, but he pulled a straw and had to be the drummer. And he's amazing. And he taught himself. Gibson just learnt to play bass by himself too, I think. Yeah, they're a great duo. Their music is fun and fast and feels like it's not too caught up in itself. It feels like it's built from the instruments forwards. They didn't come into the instruments necessarily with an idea of what they wanted to do with them. They let the instruments lead the way, and I think that led to somewhere really fruitful, because they've been doing a similar kind of thing for a really long time, and yet it's still great, and it never feels like they've gotten to the end of what they can do with it. I'm going to start reading my notes now. I've fallen into a structure of doing intro, then reading notes. I've written, I like the way that despite their intensity, the pair don't wear blatant personas. Chippendale drums in a mask because he likes to and because he can put a mic in there. He says, "That's all," when he's done. It feels genuine despite the spectacle. That's sort of a hard thing to do. The band kind of refused to let people build a mythos or something. It feels, despite everything, extremely human. Yeah. I read an article. I think I'm saying yeah too much, but I read an article a while ago that described them as sounding like a mutant steamroller and or something like a post-apocalyptic Mad Max car and a screaming imp. And we didn't like that much, because I feel like the band are pretty honest in the fact about that they're two guys and they make a lot of noise, which I think that's paraphrasing a review I read of them. I didn't want to get into talking about reviews because I read a lot of YouTube comments. And I read a lot of reviews and articles and stuff about anything I like. But, yeah, they, despite everything, despite how good they are at their instruments, despite how loud the music they make is, they don't try and seem like spare characters. They come on stage and they're two guys and they're having a pretty good time. And they have kids, and this is their job, and they're good at it, and they like doing it, and it's nice. It's nice to see a band that feels personable in what they do, and feel like, oh, I can see that as a person. That's not somebody trying to obscure the fact that they're a person in any way. That's someone cool. It's been commented on a million times by people, but the dynamic between Gibson and Chippendale's stances in the way they stand is great. Chippendale on drums is just going crazy. He's all over the place. He's this kind of mass of limbs just hitting and moving, and Gibson stands stock straight. And doesn't emote and is just fiddling with the bass so fast. And it's great. It's really funny to watch the dynamic of the band. The mix in this specific video is insanely good. It complements the camera work amazingly. I've written the low notes of the bass rattle beneath the drums, which sounds almost muffled. It sounds somehow overblown to shit and super clear at the same time. It's awesome and suits the music perfectly. Whoever was the mixing engineer did an incredible job. The cameras are great. They're kind of shaking and moving around everywhere. In the crowd at one point, you see a guy flip upside down. I know that's supplementary to the music itself, and if I just wanted to talk about the video, I should probably put it in the film category, but this list is loose as it is. I'll refine it over subsequent years of doing this project. Yeah. I don't know. The drumming is amazing. It's just these sort of clattering waves of noise. I've written, that was the note I wrote, but yeah. The last note I have written is, at a point in the video, Chippendale recognizes a struggling bouncer and yells at a crowd member to pass the guy a towel. It's great. I really, admire the impulse to try and help out the bouncer who's having a hard time. But I also think it's funny when Chippendale points and yells with the drumstick. His eyes are wide open. He looks crazy, and the echo pedal attached to the microphone and his mask is on. So he goes, "For him, for him, for him." And it's just echoing over each other in a way that's so loud and strange. It's awesome. The performance bleeds into the interaction around it in a way that's cool. That one took me, god damn it, 10 minutes again. I gotta get faster. The next is another specific single video. This is Andrew Bird performing Plasticities live from the basement. Andrew Bird is a big favourite of a close friend of mine. When I first listened to his music in 2018, I didn't understand what was special about it. I thought I've heard this kind of thing before. But now I really like it. He's got an amazing handle on melody and loop, and how to have something repeat without being boring. This performance is just him with a guitar, a violin, his voice, and a loop pedal. And he puts it into this incredible performance. He pulls off such a beautiful flowing piece that you can forget is looping. That's hard to do with a loop pedal. I own a loop pedal. I got it for a birthday. I kind of brought it up as a birthday present as a joke. And it got bought. And I'm no good at it. A loop pedal is a hard thing to use. It's an incredible usage of the loop pedal. Anyway, let's get into the notes. There's a real human quality to the performance. The idea of someone helping to fight your battles is reassuring. It's lullaby-like in a way. So the lyrical content has Andrew Bird personifying himself and a group as a kind of a we figure who will fight for the things that matter in your life, your concert halls and your dying cities, whereas they, a sort of corporate business or a capitalist force, they'll fight for your neural walls and your plasticities. So they'll fight for the ability to sell you things. And it's honest. It's honest about the state of that sort of thing. There's a lot of people in the world who care about selling you stuff and not a lot else, despite the fact they might think they care about other things. You pull it apart and there's a lot of people in the world who just don't seem to give a shit. And that sucks. It sucks. And I don't know, the song having this reassuring edge where it's like, we will fight for what is worth it to you, or what is worth something to you, is I often think about myself not as alone in things in a real way, because it feels dramatic in a sense. And I don't mean to say everyone, but in my specific situation where I have people around me all the time thinking I'm alone in the world is kind of dramatic. But I do feel like I have to tackle things myself a lot for my own personal satisfaction or whatever. I shouldn't dismiss that with or whatever, but also this is going out to a broader audience than just me. I don't want to articulate on my inner workings too much because that's mine and the people I closely like and will talk to about it. And you're not necessarily one of them. Unless you're my friend and I already talked to you about it, in which case you are probably one of them. Yeah. So it's reassuring to the idea that somebody will help you fight your battles. The violin, voice, and guitar complement each other as instruments perfectly. Like the electronics in King Krule, they're all of the same sort of texture and emotion. They fit together and mesh together beautifully well. It's amazing. It's the end result is just a beautiful tone. I think, this is where the notes start proper. I think what really stood out to me, though, about the performance is the color and the camera quality. Combined with the music, the whole atmosphere is very warm and human. The amount of grain is just about perfect. I am a self-professed grain aficionado, which means I know nothing. I just really like camera grain. I love 480p. The amount of grain is perfect. This is standard resolution at its most beautiful. And when I want to demonstrate to people why I think there are effects that HD cannot get, this is the video I show. This is the video that I use to demonstrate, well, standard resolution is good too. And it can be great because it can look like this. And then I write about the set. The room is great too. There's something in it that harkens back to my childhood, and it's hard to put an exact finger on it. The colours, maybe? Earthy reds and greens giving way to stone and plaster underbellies. It's like my house or my grandparents' house or my school before all the renovations. The only place that hasn't been redone in my school is the downstairs bathroom near the maths offices. That place, dingy as it is dingy. There are rude poems written on the back of the cubicle doors, which I can feel all sorts of ways about depending on the day. The dinginess feels like a kind of time capsule of a place other people didn't like, but I kind of did, the way the school used to be before it got all renovated and changed. And I'm not just looking back on it because I liked it when I was young. I don't know, it had a feeling about it. And a lot of people don't like places that have a feeling about them if that place is not modern and clean and nice. Like, there are places that suck, and I really like. I think I like things that suck sometimes. I like a lot of places that other people don't seem to. I don't like them because they're dingy. I like them because they're beautiful. I know that sounds snobbish. Maybe other people feel the same way as me, and I'm trying to interpret my feelings as more unique. But, I like public bathrooms. I like holes, and I like ditches. That's one of my notes. I feel like that gets across what it needs to say. The final thing is, violin is a very emotive instrument, and Birds is gorgeous. The way he plays it, it's so full of feeling. He's such an incredible player of every instrument he picks up. His voice is great. His violin is just this kind of whooping, soaring. It's amazing. It's a pretty short video. You might really, really like it. The next thing, it's Schlagenheim by Black Midi. Okay, this one's exciting. I'm still listening to this one all the time. Black Midi is a band that is in the UK right now, and people all over the internet love a whole lot. They're popular on places like Rate Your Music, I think, which I'm trying to stop myself going on, because it's bad to read reviews all the time by people. I want to look for reviews every time you like something. I want to be very confident about the things I like and just be like, no, I like that. And I know my reasons for liking that. I don't need to know other people's reasons for liking that, because I don't want that to come into my reasoning process as much. Unless, again, they're my friends and I care for them and I want to know what they think about stuff. Anyway, Schlagenheim is a rock album. It's loud. The guitars are great. The band is made up of Geordie Greep, Morgan Simpson, Cameron Picton, and Matt Kowalski-Kelvin, who's currently on leave from the band to work on because of mental health concerns. It was his own choice. They are preparing to release their second album, Cavalcade. I keep saying that wrong. Despite knowing that word and having known it for a long time. Schlagenheim was their first album from 2019. It has a number of songs on it, and the songs sound a number of ways. This is one that you might have heard. The vocals are kind of, somebody has described them that I've read somewhere as sounding like an auctioneer, a cattle auctioneer or something, having a breakdown, which is kind of true, but also not, because there's more emotion belying that than you'd expect. There's the guitars are very angular, which is another word that music critics love, and so I can't use, and I have to find a new version of, because cliches bog down otherwise good sentiments. Like, the word angular, I'm sure, is plenty good if you're the first person who ever said it, and maybe up to the fifth person who ever said it. But past that point, people start to notice it, and if they start to notice it, then they stop registering it, they stop listening to it. People don't analyze the meaning of cliches much. If you want to say something and you want people to listen, you have to find a way to say it that other people haven't said it in before. And it has to be as good as the ways that people have been saying it in for years. And that means every cliche you come up against becomes a challenge for your own creativity. It's like, I could do this the tried and true way, or I could find my way, which people will listen to because they won't realize that I'm doing my variation on the tried and true way. Probably. They might not. That's the trick about cliches. I've been thinking about that lately. Anyway, what was I saying? I was saying something about Schlagenheim. I'm just going to read my notes. This is going on a really long time. Group's deranged vocals are pretty perfectly matched by music that sounds like like it's ranting at someone and itself and the world in general. It gestures wildly. Yeah, the music, it flies all over the place. It's constantly changing melody and rhythm and skipping from one idea to the next, to the next, to the next, while the vocals rant over the top and murmur and screech and kind of change. And it gives the effect of someone arguing or a manic internal process. Manic is the wrong term, but a fractured and kind of off-kilter internal process. It's surprisingly evocative of that, I think, if you listen to it in certain ways. But this album's so good, you should listen to it without listening to me talking about it, because then you might get my impression of it, and God knows you can get your own impression if you listen to it. The second note is there's a line in the song Speedway, which is really great. I change what I think my favorite song is every time I listen, but at the moment I really like Speedway and I really like Years Ago. Anyway, there's a line in Speedway that says stock car racing, the Speedway. But when I was listening to that, initially I thought it was slot car racing, the Speedway. Like a slot car is in one of those little cars you put on a track and you squeeze the trigger and it spins around. And I think that's a great line. And so I'll have to adapt that and steal that for one of my songs. I'll have to write something about slot car racing, because I think it's imagery that I've not heard anywhere else. I don't hear anyone else talking about slot cars, and yet it's evocative of something. And there we go. That's breaking the cliche. Isn't it interesting when people say things you haven't heard them say before? The next note is something I tried to say earlier, but I realized I had a note on, so I didn't say it. I love the style of guitar riffs Black Midi seem to fall into. They have weird, awkward points and valleys. A lot of the guitar work sounds like repeated phrases of voice, in a sense. Yeah, you've got this... My immediate thought was Talking Heads, but it's not Talking Heads-ish. You've got guitars that kind of do a pattern, a loop, for a little while, and they'll loop on it, and then they'll skip on to the next thing, and they'll do that. But all of them kind of jut out at weird angles. And all my words that I'm using to describe this music are not good enough, my adjectives. As I said earlier, it's hard to find good adjectives to describe a sound. And I need a lot longer to think about this music, because I've written a note about this later, but this band seems to conjure really good new adjectives from good music journalists, which is, I think, in general, a good sign. If you're conjuring new adjectives, you're doing something different and interesting enough and new enough, probably. So, yeah, maybe that's a good thing. But I like the guitar work. The end of the song Years Ago, at the end of the song Years Ago, and this is a spoiler for the album. That's not a joke. This is actually a spoiler for the album. So if you want to listen to this album, you should stop and listen to it. It's really good. I've said it a bunch of times now. I'll stop. But at the end of Years Ago, the band it goes, all the instruments go reverbing, the band goes, ah, and you hear their voices get quieter and quieter, and then there's a really loud splash sound. And it sounds like them all falling off a cliff into the sea. And what that made me think of is, it's just great audio comedy. And you don't get a lot of audio comedy anymore. When I was younger, I listened to The Goon Show a lot, which is the 1950s radio comedy, which was very, very influential on a lot of British kind of surrealist comedies. I think Monty Python was fairly involved with that sort of thing, for better or worse, I guess. But I like a lot of what the Goons did, and I think audio comedy is a thing that's less explored now, and I think it's just nice to see some sort of representation of that, and something that makes me laugh in the song. The ranting of the vocals, the ranting quality of the vocals never feels overdone, because there are regular moments where the music opens up, like the camera pulls back. So you go from an internal view of this character's head, to this camera pulling back and showing the scene they're in before it moves back into the head again, and you hear them talking in their brain, and it's slamming noise, and the speed is rising and rising and rising. It's going up in pulse and pitch, and then the song ends and it'll be quieter again. It's like, oh, we've woken up the next morning, and the person we were following is now at home, and they're recalling stuff from before, or they're in the aftermath of it. It's music that's, I guess what I'm talking about now is the character of the dynamics of the music. It's just, I don't know, it's the sort of music that ends up making you think about it in good ways. I feel like everything I'm saying here is redundant. People talk about this band enough. It's one of those bands that's a real talk of the town. So, I like Cameron's vocals a lot too. So the main vocalist of the band is Jordy Greep, who has a really kind of strange delivery. But Cameron Picton also delivers vocals on several songs, and he's got a little bit more of a conventional style. But I really like him too. I like how he adds to the band. He's got a more... Whereas Greep is very theatrical, Picton is much more flat and monotone, and he contrasts Greep very, very well. It seems like the opposite end of the spectrum. It's like a man you're going from a man who's been yelling to some sort of accountant or contractor. It's fun. But Speedway, which is the song I mentioned earlier and one he contributes vocals to, is fantastic. The line in the lyrics, dogs are going missing tonight, is really evocative. There's another line about dogs on that song too, where it just mentions old greyhounds, which is great. I don't know, I like those lines a lot. I think the writing specifically on that song is really good and really evocative of kind of just life in the suburbs and like city development. It feels sometimes like watching a time lapse of a building starting to be built, or walking past street level of a building starting to be built, and then later it cuts to dissatisfied people drifting fast on the highway because they need something to do. And the lines like dogs are going missing tonight, it's just mysterious and strange, and it suggests a darker underbelly, or maybe the dogs are just running away, or what's going on with the dogs. Dogs are always going missing in the suburbs. It's sad. You see missing dog posters all over the place. This song is going, okay, tonight there are going to be some more missing dog posters. It's the suburbs. That's interesting. That's interesting, I think. I like lyrics that... I'm trying to slow myself down. But we're already hitting an hour and 10. This better not be my longest one yet. Yeah, I like lyrics that manage to point to a bunch of kind of slightly obscure representations of a place or a town or a certain kind of a kitsch. And that does it really well. Morgan Simpson's drumming is amazing over the whole project. I really love it on Speedway. When he's playing, his sound is very full and quick. It's, I don't know, the sound feels very complete. His drumming never feels like there's anything missing from it. The snare sound, I think the snare sound is perfect, more or less. It fits in with everything else. All the synth sounds are also amazingly integrated. They never steal the spotlight. I've only messed with the stems, because they released stems for all the songs, so they were quickly taken offline. You can still get them if you look around a little. I've only messed with the stems for the song Near DTMI. There's a lot going on in there. You've got a bunch of bits of synth underlying the guitar and stuff, but you don't recognize when you're listening to the music all on its own. Some of the sounds come together to make something that sounds like one greater sound. There's some sounds I feel like I hear when I'm listening to the songs that I'm not even sure are actually being played in the music. It might just be an imagined interaction between multiple sounds that are forming a greater whole. Like something I think is just a guitar being run through crazy pedals is a mix of like 3 synths and 2 guitars. like a cowbell or something. It's cool. It's cool. It's inventive work. Not inventive. I don't want to give that too much ridiculous internet credit. I feel a little self-conscious because I'm talking a lot about a band that I like and other people also really like, but other people like it in the hipsterish sense. I'm definitely a hipster with this sort of stuff, so I don't want to be in with a crowd of recognizable hipsters, because oh my god, then people might know I like stuff. It's like I like my tastes are affected by the obscurity of the things I like, and then what will I do? My reputation. It's 11:45 p.m. I'm probably gonna keep going. Well written. Yeah, okay, that's about the adjectives. Black Midi have a fun stage presence in videos. I like the way Grip goes back and forwards on his legs when he's playing guitar. I think this would be good music to run in a circle to for like an hour. Yeah, that's self-explanatory, that note. The final note is... that one's not important. Okay. And the very last piece of music is the longest section in here, is this album, The Sickening Shrieks from Ghenloch Heap by Mr. Yote. I went through a real phase of listening to Yote's music earlier this year. Yote is predominantly a character rapper. His production style is kind of dense and semi-acoustic, but his beats are very atmospheric. I think he's a great producer in a lot of ways. But I got into listening to Yote a lot earlier this year, and I bought some albums, and I think I own almost his full discography now. And he also released an album this year. I think I got into listening to his albums last year too. But he released an album this year, he released an album last year, sorry. And I think maybe I listened to him in 2019 as well. But in 2020, he released Pello Phantasmo, which I'm not talking about because I refuse to have this list make sense. Instead, I'm talking about his 2018 EP, because that one's really good. Excuse me, my nose is blocked. The 2018 EP is pretty fantastic. Initially, it was my least favorite thing he'd made, but in note 1 I say, it seems to be required of Yote albums that you listen kind of without any other noise distraction and several times, because there's a lot of detail in them that you seem to miss your first times through, and sometimes that detail is like you find the puzzle piece that you were missing. The detail is really important to the overall sound of the songs, which is surprising because I don't find that with other musicians that much. But yeah, you need to be able to take in that detail to really appreciate the whole. It always takes a long time, I feel, to push into a new project by him, which is strange because at first they don't seem like they would belie or have that much depth. I've already said belie in another discussion, but you don't feel like they would have that much depth. You feel like you can see it quite quickly. But it feels like more going on. There's a feeling that they're more than the sum of its parts. I don't know. Yeah. I don't feel like I've quite managed. The reason I'm not talking about Pello Phantasmo, that new album, is I don't feel like I've gotten to the point where I'm really in tune with it yet, where I've listened to it enough in good enough conditions. But I listen to Ghenloch Heap a lot. I end up adoring it overall. This project overall, I think it's rooted quite a lot in the bass guitar, which comes up throughout of it. A lot of the rest of the instrumentation sort of gargles or thumps on top of the bass. It's amazing, but it's amazing once you get into it, but the songs start off feeling hard to interpret. However, again, as you listen to them more, they become deep and rewarding and great. I think out of any music I've listened to for a long time, Mr. Yote's feels the most rewarding for repeated listens. Despite being melodic in some parts. The melodies are extremely buried under reverb and stuff, but there's very few hooks in the traditional sense. There's really catchy bits that are meant to grab you. So the EP doesn't get stale. It's got that real musical honesty thing going on, that I don't want to trick you in any way into listening to this music. You just gotta stick with it. Yote's voice is great here. It's often saturated by effects, sort of humming and mocking and barking. He has a childlike presence at points, one that feels frustrated and upset, which is part of the character mythology, the character lore of what he's rapping about, but also you can draw comparisons between that lore and the way his voice sounds, and also the general mythology of ghosts as spirits with unfinished business, I guess, or the unfulfilled. 2 minutes into the song, Blight and the Beast, or Beast and the Blight, I don't remember, mallets and bass come in. Combined with already echoey vocals, it's just outstanding texture. Like, the album has so many moments of just fantastic texture, and overall the atmosphere is just right, and all the instruments are coming together in the way that's just right. It's, again, as I get more and more excited about this music, I'm talking faster, which is harder to listen to, but maybe makes the video length less enormous. And yeah, it's also I get more excited about it. I feel like I have less specifically constructive to say. I think the music's just great. Just listen to this. This is on Bandcamp. It's not that much money. Yeah, okay, that's what's next? I appreciate and respect music that uses digital production but tries to eschew typically identifiable sound design and synth work. I know that saying that is reductive to a lot of kind of flat, more strictly electronic music, but I respect Yote's use of samples and a lot of world music samples, and when he does use bass and synth and stuff, it's all built to fit in with the naturalistic sounds he uses elsewhere, and it ends up feeling like the synths are rooted within the physical world of the music, and that adds a sort of texture to it. You can imagine the synth as an instrument being played, and then it fits within the mix better, and it fits within the idea of the lore, and that's worthwhile, I think, and it works really, really well in this music. The tracks are, despite first listen they all sound kind of similar, but they are, in actuality, once you dig into it, quite distinct from each other, and each contain a lot of ideas. The runtime of the whole project is also just about perfect to explore the feeling. It's an excellent, the overall atmosphere, it's an excellently full feeling and as concise as it needs to be EP. It feels perfectly paced, it feels, not perfectly, it feels very well paced, it feels very well lengthed. It's really well put together. It's a kind of consummate package. I think I might be using the word consummate wrong, but I'm not going to Google it mid-recording. I'm sorry. The drums are so physical. Yeah. All the drumming, I think, is digital, but they've got a real physicality to them. They sound like somebody kind of pounding on a table sometimes, but without the dryness of sound that implies. Like a dry fist on balsa wood would sound pretty bad. But the drumming on this, despite sounding kind of hand percussion at points, feels very lush and full. And that's a hard sound to pull off, and I'm not really sure how you actually are supposed to do that. Or how you do that. The whole album is rich in a sort of dark, wet texture. It conjures images of swamp-side towns pouring sort of pine needle smoke, and movements in dark bushes and rushes and bull reeds and things. It's great. It's very evocative in a lot of ways. The vocals are theatrical in the way that Mr. Yote's always is, but I guess that can be a turn-off for people. But I don't mind. I like that. My final note is just crazy. Double exclamation mark. So good! Double exclamation mark. It gets across how I feel. It is crazy. It's so good. Wow! I love music. I love to listen to it. I'm not always this excited about it, but I think music is great to listen to. I think it's great to complement your actions. I think it's great to take a break from music sometimes too and just listen to the sounds around you. That's very important. Please don't listen to music all the time in your life, or you will miss out on a lot of sounds that are very important. Take some time away from other stuff and just be in your body for a bit sometimes. But also, listen to good music. It's a very human pursuit, making good music, making good sounds. We've been doing it forever, and it doesn't seem like we're going to stop, and I'm glad, because I love it. And I don't think I've ever met someone who flat out doesn't like music. People like different styles of music, but I've never met someone who says, no, I don't like music. I don't like listening to music. Which means it's very, very universal in a way. Or at least the appreciation of it. I don't mean to say there's some universal connecting fabric between all humans, because I'm not sure there is. I think that would be papering over the relations between many humans and many other humans. However, that may be a product of the situations we live in rather than anything innately within us. I'd like to believe, actually, we can overcome anything, even if it was supposed to be innately within us, but I don't know. I don't have the answers. People maybe could be good. Music is often good. I'm going to pause and move on to the next segment and have a glass of water. My throat is so raw. Hello. That pause, which for you is very quick, close to instantaneous, for me was a period of roughly 11 hours. I was recording the last bit at the end of it at 12 a.m., so I decided I needed to go to bed because I've been keeping myself to a rigid sleep schedule of waking up at 7:05 a.m. and I didn't want to get too little sleep. I was already getting too little sleep. I usually try and be asleep by 11. But yeah, so I slept and I'm back. It's 11:03 a.m. on 19th of the 4th, 2021. I meant to start recording this at 9 a.m., but it didn't pan out that way because I helped some people with some things, and then I ended up browsing Itch, the game website that I host my games on, and looking for cool stuff. I found a couple of things that seem interesting. Anyway, speaking of video games, that's that's what it's called, a segue. Yeah, this is a bit about video games. This is the section of the video that is about video games, which are a medium which I dedicate a lot of time to thinking about and much less time to playing. This is a list of all the video games I really liked last year, and I played at least several of them before last year, but they really cemented themselves as my favorites last year. I've talked about that earlier, so I'll get on with it. The first game is the Norwood Suite by Cosmo D. I probably won't get into the habit of saying by whenever I talk about games, because I think you can attribute things to a development studio, I guess, but that has turnover. This is a single indie dev, though, with some help, and I get the feeling, I don't know, authorship is strange, and I don't know if it doesn't apply to bigger productions. I'm not sure how I feel about it in relation to smaller ones. I gotta think about that more. Anyway, the Norwood Suite is a adventure game that was released. I actually don't know. I don't know when it was released, but it has the player travel for one night to a hotel called the Norwood Suite, and complete small quests for people. The actual gameplay is very basic. You can pick things up, you can talk to people, you can sort of give people things. You're doing mostly search and findy quest lines. But the thing that really holds the game together and is really fantastic about it is the atmosphere, among other things. The music is also extremely good. I think Cosmo D is and whoever is Archipelago, I think. maybe I know that guy did the soundtrack for Off Peak, which was Cosmo D's first game. I don't know if they worked on the Norwood Suite, sorry. But there's this thing that I've noticed in games, this specific atmosphere which games seem to be able to pull off really well, which is sort of dreamlike adjacent, where you get the feeling that some of it's real and some of it's not, or something strange is colliding with the real, or things are slightly distorted in some way. You can also feel it in games like Glitch Hikers, and it's a similar sort of feeling I get sometimes when I stargaze, which I really like doing. But yeah, I don't know, it's just one of those atmospheres that I've noticed several indie games seem to have really managed to pull off. And it makes me wonder if that's the kind of, or what that means for the field of games, that this is an atmosphere, this is a greater sensation that the games are able to pull off in a way that's very effective, when other atmospheres seem to stumble, kind of, when they try to be done in games, or don't work as well. This sort of drifty, dreamlike thing works out. I just said the same thing about 5 different ways, but the Norwood Suite also, yeah, I think it's the best execution of that atmosphere I've ever seen. And also, it's just kind of an enthralling game to explore. It pulls off so much with a kind of childlike sense of wonder in its exploration. Actually, it's not childlike, it's just a sense of wonder in its exploration. I think, and this is, again, going to move quickly into spoilers for the game and things that you should find out for yourself. Look, if you like adventure games, if you like kind of slightly idiosyncratic graphics and storytelling, but you love atmosphere in video games, this game is not that expensive. You should go buy it and play it before you listen to me talking about it. It really is one of the best games I've played in quite a while. Anyway, I think something that is nailed so much by the Norwood Suite is secrets. This is where the spoiler starts, secrets. You've got, very early on in the game prompts you to start sort of pulling on books in bookshelves. And you pull on one, and without being necessarily directed to, the whole bookshelf swings open and it reveals a secret passage. And it's like, oh, wow! And you expect it to just be, other games might just hide one thing behind there, but you walk down, there's this whole sequence of passages, and they move throughout the whole hotel, and you find more and more as you go on through the game. And it's just, there's something great about that. When I'm in a new building, I like to explore. I restrain myself from doing this in the houses of other people because it's rude. But if I am just walking around the city, I'll often find kind of big multi-story buildings, and I'll go up through each story and I'll look around and I'll sort of snoop a little bit, and I'll sometimes almost get stuck on a fire escape or something. And, you know, I like that sense of exploration, and the fact that you find actual secret passageways in this game feels kind of like wish fulfillment. It's, you found the thing you were always looking for. You were finding a real secret. Not that I'm necessarily going out and looking to find like a James Bond villain's lair or something, but you know, there's a element to it which is just, it's nice. It's nice, and it's exciting to find something kind of monumental and that appeals back to your sort of, I guess, childhood cliches of what you might find in a place, like secret passages. And there's something really lovely about that. It nails the reason people explore, or at least for me it feels like that. It gets the reason people explore, and it plays off of that. And there's a bunch of interesting stuff to find the passageways too. There's one bit that's sticks out really clearly in my memory, where you go down into a basement and you look out at this window, and there's this impossible scene of just this cavernous black space with like train lines on massive arched bridges traveling through it, just a couple of them. I don't know if trains ever run across it, but when I found it, I kind of went down there and I just stared at it for a while. I was like, wow, look at this thing that I found underneath all of this. Because you don't have to go through all the passages, I think. Some of them are just there for navigation and to be interesting. And it adds to the dreamlike tone, and the dreamlike tone adds to the exploration as well. You feel like you're falling through the cracks a little bit and seeing something, and then... No, you don't feel like you're falling through the cracks. That's a different game thing. That's the thing that Portal does at the end of it, where you feel like you're breaking out of the boundaries of what the game was supposed to be, and you're seeing the back areas, but it's contextualized. And then games like the Stanley Parable pull the context away and then do a meta angle on it. And that stuff's interesting too. That's another thing games are really good at pulling off. Or people have figured out that games are really good at pulling off. I think what helps the Norwood suite too is it's such a friendly space in many ways. There's an antagonistic force of a company trying to buy out the hotel, but even they are pretty humanized. You see them kind of bathing in the pool and hanging around. The pool's great, by the way. That area has this kind of mist to it and this frosted glass, and you look out and you can see the city. But when I'm in that room, in that game, I can imagine the temperature of it. I can imagine the humidity. I'm a fan of public pools, but I haven't managed to get to one for a while, considering last year. But yeah, you get that real feeling from it. So something in how it's presented and built and designed is just right. If you could imagine the temperature of a room and something and the smell of it, it's probably being done pretty well. That's a good sign, I think. Anyway, the pool is great. You can see out the horizon and things. But even the kind of antagonists of the game are humanized, and you see them and you are around them, and they're okay. Like, you don't want them to win, but there's no grand evil. It's just sort of the procession of time and the procession of business in a way. And it feels nice to have a game which is a bit more low stakes, but not in a way that feels... I don't know, I don't want to say patronizing. Patronizing is definitely not the right word. But it doesn't feel low stakes in a way that seems like somebody went into the narrative going, I want to make something low stakes. It's not relaxing, or it doesn't try and calm you down necessarily. It's just, this is the conflict that's happening. It is a conflict, but you don't have much place in it as you wander into the hotel. You kind of doing your own thing, and you get to pay attention to it as an outsider, which I feel like works well because it's a good fit for the role of the player. The player doesn't necessarily, for a short game like this, have stock or take stock of the story and really invest themselves in it. So having the player character be an outsider who sort of wanders through the thing that's happening and doesn't feel super attached to it allows for a better character-player relationship. What else? I like how friendly characters are, and I think it's also wish fulfillment that you can actually solve people's problems in a really concise way. Like, it's nice in games when people have a problem as simple as, like, oh, I need a record. I need a record needle for my record player, otherwise I can't play this record. Because people don't have problems that are that simple in real life, and problems that you can easily solve like that. It's like, oh, if they need a record needle, somewhere in this house there'll be a record needle. And I would probably not want to put that in one of my games, because I don't like the idea of things wrapping up super satisfyingly, because I don't think, again, that's not really how things work. But also, it's nice sometimes in a game. It's nice that it all wraps up by the end of it, and you kind of get in and get out. And yeah, it's just a really good game. Great atmosphere that's indicative of a thing indie games, I think, are really finding. Great environment design. Amazing music. Fantastic exploration. Yeah, man. The Norwood Suite. It's good. The next game is Thumper by Drool, which has cemented itself as one of my favorite games of all time at this point. Thumper's real good. Have you noticed I can do a trick where I make my voice low? I think it's funny, and I use it for emphasis when I make jokes sometimes. I should not overuse it. Thumper is a rhythm game, sort of. I would describe it less though as a rhythm game, because I'm less getting into the feeling of rhythm games, which I feel like is this sort of a groove you get into and bobbing along to it, and more of a I'm reacting to things coming at me, and I'm playing it more like an action game. In that way, it might be the most bare bones, stripped down possible action game ever made. It's like a parody of a video game. You push the buttons at the right time, you push the right combination of buttons at the right time to win. And despite that, it's amazing. It's such a good experience. It's made... Earlier I talked about Brian Gibson of Lightning Bolt, and he was one of the 2 developers of this game, plus they had some outside help. But he described it as he had worked on making the Rock Band games, and he wanted to make a game that sort of represented, I think, a different part of the musical experience. Whereas Rock Band was about that big superstar kind of virtue, or that big superstar dream. That dream of, oh, I'm going to be famous and I'm going to be on stage and I'm going to play a cool song and it's going to be easy for me to play because I'm famous. Thumper is about the actual hard, in a way, trying to gamify the hard parts of learning an instrument. The brutal repetition and just trying to get something right, but your fingers won't quite get it until it does, and you just start to flow along with it, and it's just pounding out notes at you, like firing them out of a cannon at you. And somehow you're able to hit all of them perfectly because you're not thinking about it that much. And you just know where your fingers are supposed to be. And that's the point at which Thumper becomes incredibly gratifying. It's not so much a typical rhythm game flow state, I think, as much as it is something else that's pretty unique to the game. It's hard to describe the act of playing it. I can't talk about the game that much in the way I did, for instance, the Norwood Suite, because whereas the Norwood Suite is very detailed and has a lot of things that I can describe, Thumper is bare bones in a lot of ways. The visuals are great. It's got a lot of sort of psychedelic stuff going on in a very sinister way, but when you're playing it, you're not really looking at the visuals at all. You're kind of looking at the notes, you're very vaguely listening, but you're more just in the act of playing it. You start the game and you think about button combinations a little bit, and then at a point you just stop. And whenever I boot up the game, I'm not thinking about it, I'm just doing it. I think in a way the bare bonesness of the track, the fact is you just run down a track as the notes come at you, and that track, then you could probably draw connections to it in a lot of metaphorical ways if you wanted to. You can read into it as much as you like. The second drawing on the right is me doing that. I felt like, in some ways, it felt like being in the groove of a record as you travel down it, of a vinyl record. And I think the, again, spoilers for the video game, the very final area in which you, I'll actually give you a second to tab off. This is a spoiler for the final level of Thumper. Okay, done. The needle, or the massive triangle at the end of the game that bears down the track, feels like approaching the needle of the record almost, as it skips and spins. It's really interesting. Yeah, it's Thumper is not a musical game, I don't think. The background tracks are mostly sinister drones, and the later levels play in time signatures that maybe feel more sensical if you're a better musician than I am, or have spent more time trying to play in polyrhythms. But yeah, at a point for me, it just becomes a game of reactions and forceful holding to those reactions. When you die in Thumper, the controller vibrates a tiny bit and you're dead, and you start again almost immediately. And so you just get into this repetitious state of doing it over and over and over, and thinking about it a bit, but just trying to smash it out. It's pretty amazing. It's, yeah, when you're playing Thumper, I don't know. I can't say I'm only thinking about it when I play, because that's not how it works. I end up thinking about other stuff a bit. But if I'm really into it, and for the early stages when I was really into it, I wasn't thinking about much else. I was just sort of playing it. I think I described somewhere a while ago that playing Thumper felt like using a crowbar to break off something in the back of my skull. it switches something on. Something in there lights up while I'm playing. And it's not dopamine, and it's not something that I feel like the game has been necessarily created to exploit. It's just, there's a kind of focusedness to it, which is really great. I like Thumper a lot. It's, the most stripped down action game I've ever played. And it does cool stuff with your head, I think. It's fun. It's fun. My god, I forgot to call any game fun so far, I think. I don't usually put a huge amount of stock on fun as the objective of games, but Thumper is fun. I like this video game. Next one. Next game on this list is Nioh, which was developed by Team Ninja. I don't know when it came out. And I can't actually play Nioh anymore because I was playing an legal copy that I had, and it stopped working. So I got to a point in Nioh, and I guess the universe has told me that I will get no further in Nioh. But Nioh is fun. It's the first proper Souls-like I've played, and I still don't like that genre definition a whole lot. It feels like Doom clone. I'm sure people have drawn that description a lot, but you know what? Souls-like is fine, actually. Who cares? Video games have always had bad descriptions for them. Our genre titles are awful and vague, and that's good, because genres don't really help with a whole lot often. They help with some categorization, but not a huge amount. Nioh is the first Souls-like I've ever played, the first proper third-person action game Souls-like, and not just a game that's deriving inspiration from Souls games. I'm still yet to play any of the Dark Soulses. I've messed around with Dark Souls 3 a little bit, because my younger brother was playing it, but I haven't properly played any. We also have a copy of Dark Souls 1, so I might play that at some point. But Nioh, the introductory level's not great. I mean, it's fine. But once you get into the actual meat of the game, it's fun. It's good, satisfying combat. I chose the two... you are allowed to have two weapons on your character at any time. And I chose the Odachi and the Tonfa, which are, respectively, I believe, the slowest and fastest weapons in the game. And I ended up using the very slow one a lot, which was this massive sword that's bigger than, you're almost as tall as your character. And you can swing in wide arcs or slam down over your head. Nioh's combat system is good. You have multiple stances, 3 stances for each weapon, a low, a mid, and a high stance. High is slowest but most powerful, middle is an all-arounder, and low is fast but weak. And each stance has different light and heavy attacks, and you can chain stances into each other. So you can go from a mid stance with the Odachi, sort of horizontal swipes, to swapping to a high stance and slamming down while the enemy is still staggered. You can get a long way with that technique alone. But in bigger enemies, you're trying to weigh up the speed at which your attacks are performed, because as is the case with most Souls-likes, you can't cancel out of many of your attacks. So when you start, you're committed to it, and if you get hit during that, you're knocked down, and you don't get to put the attack in. So it's about timing when it's okay to do an attack, and the rest of the time dodge rolling. But if you get too far out from an enemy, you can't do much to them. So you want to keep in close, but also keep the reasonable distance, and you're running all sorts of different directions in your head as you're playing it to fight. And the game also understands that it can't be hard all the time, so there's a lot of areas that there's just like one weak guy there, and you could just completely crush them. The biggest difficulty hurdle in the game is the first boss, or second boss. There's Onryoki, who's a boss you fight in the hull of a ship, and he's a massive ogre, and he takes up almost all of the space, and his attacks are very wide-reaching and can completely knock you down. He's a massive difficulty hurdle, and I think what's good about it is it teaches you... I don't know, it just teaches you that at points it's going to be very hard, but on a deeper level than that, it teaches you the rules of boss fights. Like, I initially played way too in its face, and then I played way too conservatively, and it gave me this big hurdle, which is harder than some subsequent bosses to go, no, you have to play it like this. You have to be in this middle range where you're going in for fast attacks sometimes and rolling out quickly, and then at the end of the fight you can activate your kind of invincible mode and just go in and slice as much as possible and try and knock down like the last third of the health bar. I thought that's interesting. It's interesting that it does this difficulty spike. It's not necessarily, I think, there for the sake of proving, oh, this is a hard game. It's not a Dark Souls prepare to die thing. It's more of a, this game, you're going to have bosses at points that are going to be like this or harder than this. So you've got to know how to do it. And we're not going to tell you, we're just going to give it to you, and we're going to give you the tools, and we're going to give you as many restarts as you want, and you're going to figure this out. And if you can figure this out, you can figure out the other stuff in this game. And it worked. It was somehow, I think the combat system was good enough, and the surrounding area of that boss fight had enough enemies and small guys to fight, and enthralling enough kind of dark, moody visuals to get me through it. I wanted to keep coming back, and I wanted to keep playing, and I ended up, after beating that, continuing to play the game. It's good fun. Nioh has a nice combat system. I think the visuals are quite nice in some ways. I like, it didn't get too dramatic in terms of its visuals very quickly. It's kind of very dark and windswept. The initial introductory areas are like beaches and cliffs. And I liked it. I like that, I like the yokai designs a lot too. They're slightly gritty in terms of their depiction, but I also like that they keep some of the silliness. Not that I think yokai are silly, they're an important cultural myth, but there's a element of comedy, I think, to the depictions of them. Like, you'll be attacked by characters will have eyes that bulge in a funny way, or they've got a kind of a weird, shambling expression to them, where if you came up across that in real life, that would be terrifying. Obviously, this thing is a horrible, muscle-bound monster sometimes, or this is a wall that's alive that will crush you. But looking at it through the lens of the screen, you can appreciate these things are kind of funny. And it's kind of funny to see them. They do a lot with different kinds of eyes, I think. Like, there's the wall with the eye I just mentioned, which tries to smash you, and there's the monster that I've drawn there has the big tongue that kind of whips around, and it has also these eyes that bulge out of its head a bit, which is, and a big angry brow. It looks cool, and it looks funny, which is, I think, a good balance to hit. If you can make something go, oh, that's cool, and also, I think that's, funny. I've said that. I was trying to find another word to say funny, but cool and funny is a good balance. That's Nioh. I don't know exactly if I have anything else to say about it particularly. It was a satisfying game to play that I enjoyed playing. And I can't play anymore, so I can't talk about the late game stuff. I enjoyed it. I liked it. Next is Hylics, which is a game I had on last year's list, which means I played it in 2019, but it came into my head a lot this year, and it became, I think, really one of my favorite games I've ever played. Hylics does a lot in terms of abstraction and breaking down the ideas of games into kind of fairly, I think, potent visual metaphors a lot of the time. It's also just got a really good feeling to it, a kind of unique spirit in terms of gameplay and design. It doesn't feel like it's bandwagoning really in any way. It's just sort of hopping along and doing its own thing, inspired by, it feels like, the standards of games as they currently exist. That's the wrong way to put it, but I'll describe it like this. Hylics is a game that is Hylics is a RPG maker game. So it's an RPG which is predominantly made with photographed clay. The graphics of which are predominantly made with photographed clay. And the characters, if you look at them, the main protagonist cast is all clay, but a lot of the enemies are action figures, like basic action figure bodies with kind of clay shapes built onto their head and stuff. And there's something immediately, I think, that captures the feeling of games in a world being made of clay. It's sort of... Clay, if I look back on it, is something it has an element to it that symbolizes creation. Kids play with clay. Play-Doh is a kind of modern clay equivalent. Kids make stuff out of it, and then they use that for the act of creation. You've got legends like the Golem, which is animated clay. And there's a lot of that feeling in here. It's a feeling like this is a world that's come to life from a substance which is otherwise not alive. And it comes alive due to both the creator's intervention and the player's interaction. You play as a kind of clay golem. And the golem was constructed by the creator, but your force as the player is what animates it. And as you move about the landscape, you fight things that are also kind of animated. But without your presence, I don't know. You can also say something about how the characters are made of sort of discarded and beaten up action figures. I had an essay structure I'd written that I wanted to write about Hylics, which was how it kind of, through visual metaphor, mainly through visual metaphor, questions or looks at the act of playing and how it characterizes play as finding meaning in otherwise meaningless objects. I think part of that was also, at one point you see a computer, and the computer is extremely abstractly represented as just kind of a pile of blocks. And that's vague at first, and I legitimately may be reading very far into what was just having fun with graphics. But having the computer be a pile of blocks, which is usually a children's plaything, it characterizes how I feel like it characterizes an idea about what digital media could be and what the interaction of playing a game is. It's similar to playing with blocks. You're taking these objects and you're putting them together in a form that has now meaning to you. And yeah, that's sort of like what a game is like, kind of. Again, this is all a little bit vague. I also just like Hylics because I think the music is great. I think the combat is almost perfectly balanced. It's challenging, but never feels insurmountable. The characters and cast are great. The designs of stuff is very distinctive and fun to draw and look back on. I had very little problem drawing this art for this one, which is good. I can remember so much of the stuff from it. I had to look at some reference because my imagination of things were wrong, but like after the time directly after I played Hylics, I was just scribbling out drawings of the characters a lot. I think that's good. I think there's funny jokes in the game. I like the fact that your cat looks exactly like you, just with a round nose and a quadruped body. I like... There's a fish in the netherworld, in the kind of afterlife. I don't remember what I found funny about the fish, but there was a fish that I thought was funny. What else? I like looking back more at the play metaphor. I like that a lot of the characters speak in procedurally generated nonsense poems. It strikes me as kind of a love letter in some ways. That's again a cliched term. It's poking fun and also showing respect for the ways that characters speak and NPCs speak in normal RPGs, which is usually they just talk nonsense. And in this game, why not just have them say, I don't know, whatever. The computer can make that. Some place names are just randomly constructed from a list of syllables each time you play. So the game ultimately has this feeling of a lot of this stuff is created by the computer without any specific sense of meaning, and yet we can apply meaning to it. We can apply meaning to these poems, and we can build an idea of the world out of it, and then try and come up with some sense of lore, but there's something in that action between the player and the game which is really interesting. And it makes me feel, I don't know. I was going to say a little strange when fan art tried really hard to make a kind of consistent lore for the world and characterize the golems that you run around as. But I guess that's part of an extension of the point that you can apply whatever to these. This is kind of a blank slate through which you can apply things to, which is, again, kind of game-like. I like how the game pokes fun at the 3-act structure by having a narrator who... The narrator you would feel would be some sort of stand-in for a creating figure. So maybe it's the developer. But the narrator also speaks nonsense and just pulls levers which make the words Act 1 rise out of the ground, or Act 2, or Act 3. And at the end of the game, you crash land into a place and you pull a lever and it just says, the end. There's no conclusion. You can just continue wandering around. It's great. There's so much great stuff in this game. And great, very unique stuff that I haven't seen done in other games. It's got very novel texture, and texture that's done extremely well. I just think it's great. I think Hylics is a very unique creation, but I think it's one that's done in a way that feels very thoughtful, at least to me, in some ways, and in a way that also seems fun. It just wants to have kind of fun with itself, and it also thinks about video games in an interesting way. And it brings it all together into a package which feels very whole, which is extremely hard to do. I think I value the fact that Hylics exists as a game we can play very much. It's a great game. I've played the sequel a bit, Hylics 2, which came out last year, but I didn't get super far in it. I found the battles harder. I think the combat system is also great, so I want to finish it. And I want to play it a couple of times, I think, because every time while I'm playing it, I have a hard time not thinking about it in relation to Hylics 1, which is difficult to break out of, because Hylics 1 is a game I've thought about so much, and I feel very positively about the directions it went in. And Hylics 2 in some ways feels like it's subverting the old stuff, but also might not be, and who knows, and maybe it'll kind of make my views on Hylics 1 slightly less relevant, or even more, who knows. I've said who knows twice, but Hylics 2 is also interesting, and I need to play it more. Yes, this is a good game. The next game, the second to last game I'm talking about, is Spelunky 2, which is a platformer that I think a lot of people might know about. Spelunky 1 made a big splash when it came out. It was a game that was one of kind of the early defining successful indie games of the kind of Xbox Live Arcade era, which was an interesting place for indie games, and I feel like paved some of the way for later stuff, and also seems to slip slightly from relevance now in the face of the scenes growing and things like itch.io. I enunciated that in a very weird way. Itch.io. Itch.io. But yeah, Spelunky 1 has relevance as a part of video game history. And Spelunky 2, initially I watched trailers and I wondered how it was going to build on it, because it seems pretty similar to Spelunky 1. To be clear, I hadn't really played that much of Spelunky 1. I'd played a little bit of Spelunky Classic, which was the browser game, and that eventually became Spelunky HD, which was released on consoles and is kind of the more defining Spelunky than Spelunky Classic. So Spelunky is a procedurally generated roguelike platformer, which is... those adjectives are something that I feel like have clouded video games for years and will continue to cloud them for years more. But yeah, it's... you run around, you try and get to the base of each level, and you try to continue through a network of caverns, fighting enemies and picking up treasure and interacting with things that appear and events as you attempt to descend further and further. You can unlock some shortcuts, there's a lot of secrets to discover, but at its most basic, it's a game in which you interact with the environment around you with the intent of getting lower in the level. I think that's the most basic way you can put it. Though sometimes that objective changes depending on if you're trying to achieve a secret or not. You have to play more strategically or with different rule sets. The game, by virtue of, I think, very good random generation, doesn't feel stale, I guess. As you play, I can't play the game for a hugely long time, but while I'm playing it, I feel like it's giving me fairly new stuff a lot of the time. And the networks of the caves are usually interesting and get me into interesting spots. Adding to that is destructible terrain, which allows you to adapt the landscape yourself. So you've got this relationship where the computer is creating this layout for you, and then the player can kind of edit it or make dints in it to progress. And that terrain destruction also gives the computer more leeway, because then it doesn't have to worry so much about there always being a viable route, because you can kind of blow holes. I mean, there's always one route to the exit, but if you have the virtue of having bombs or specific items, you can kind of make your own paths through it, and those, then you have to weigh up the decision of, when I use this bomb, am I wasting it for a later situation where I may need it more, or will I need it in a combat situation, or should I use it here to make this path to get this thing? Everything has a bunch of ramifications and a bunch of kind of causes. In that way, it's very, very good, very classically good game design. Every decision is pretty interesting, but you make so many of them, you end up making them quickly, and there's a sort of vague time pressure. If you stay in a level too long, an invincible insta-kill ghost comes and chases you around. So you have to weigh up, I guess, all your decisions very quickly, and that forms a series of decisions which cascade on each other and develop over the course of the run, though not to a point where it becomes overwhelming. It feels like you usually kind of have a handle on stuff. I think it was Derek Yu who made the game. I remember somewhere reading or hearing that he was inspired by the behavior of the ghosts in Pac-Man. And in Pac-Man, the ghosts, despite looking similarly, move in different ways. One moves randomly, one always tries to get behind Pac-Man, one always tries to get in front of Pac-Man. One, I forget the others, but they're simple behaviors each, and on their own would be very easy to predict. However, when kind of pushed on the player as a group, they interact with each other in strange and interesting ways and cause a lot of difficulty in predicting them or getting around them right. Pro players, I guess, have a good ability to understand exactly where the ghosts are going to be. They kind of have a ESP for the game systems, which is cool. Spelunky does that on a slightly more, not even a grander scale. It's not grander. Pac-Man is pretty grand. It's just a more forward sense. Each enemy has maybe one or two behaviors, but they're surrounded by terrain which they can interact with, enemies which they can interact with, and items which they can interact with. And that causes occasionally this moments of chaos, but more often than not, it kind of results in just interesting situations to arise to get past, which you can pretty easily do. I think Spelunky has too much of a reputation of a game you can't understand where you die for no reason. It very, very rarely happens like that. I always feel like I made the mistake, or I didn't do my decisions weren't good enough. And I don't mean to say that games where you can die for no reason are inherently worse than games where you always feel responsible for your own deaths. In fact, I like games that sometimes just do bullshit. But Spelunky, yeah, as I said earlier, it feels like very good classic game design. It's satisfying, it's interesting to play and move through, and you have a lot of decisions to make. I think the thing with my act of playing the game is I do my first runs when I start playing quite cautiously, and I'm sort of thinking it through. I'm thinking through my decisions, and I survive a long time. But as I play and I keep playing, I get annoyed with having to repeat, a little bit annoyed. I end up thinking about other things and trying to move faster and faster through it, And every time I die, I'm like, okay, that was just, I died, let's do it again. And eventually the length of my runs shortens so drastically that I'm just dying repeatedly, and I kind of stop playing, and then I come back another day. I think that's more just because of my playing style, and I have to be more conscious about the way I approach situations, because Spelunky does reward some patience, though it doesn't reward complete inaction. And yeah, Spelunky's a fun game to play. It's not a game I have deep and insightful thoughts about, or I think I'm trying to make a real point about. I think it's just a game that's well designed to be playable over a long period of time. I think the art is very nice. The enemies are all well designed in terms of their visuals. I think I have fun playing it. I don't typically... Yeah, it's one of the releases that I actually kind of got throughout the year. It's a new release that I felt like, oh, I might like to play this, because that was partially because I knew Spelunky was a part of history, and it was this very popular and informative game. Informed a lot of future games that do roguelike stuff. But I'd never played it properly, and I wanted to experience that and understand that. And I can understand how a game that is designed in this way would inspire a lot of designers. It's a game that has that real systematic, or a bunch of systems that cascade to form interesting reactions. And I think for some designers, that's something that's really appealing about games. And for some others, that's not the interesting part. I'm not sure if it's exactly the interesting part for me. But yeah, I don't know. I like playing Spelunky. I like the time I spend with it. It seems unlikely that I'll totally finish the game. Like I'm getting close to beating the last boss, but there's a bunch of secret stuff that I probably won't do. It's not that engrossing of a game for me. It's not that engrossing. It is engrossing in some ways. It's not so texturally unique or dense, or has the right kind of atmosphere I love that I want to play it a bunch of times. But for what it's worth for now, I'm enjoying Spelunky. In some ways, maybe like, no, now this game shouldn't have made the list. It's a game I started playing late in the year, and I think I put it on the list kind of just because I was playing a lot, which is sort of a lack of insight and forethought on my part. Spelunky 2 may not be a game which sticks with me a huge amount in subsequent years, but I do think it's a good game, and if this sort of stuff interests you, then it might be worth playing. If this sort of stuff interests you, you've probably already played Spelunky 2, though. It was a fairly high-profile release, considering the popularity of Spelunky 1. Yeah, it's good. Okay, on to the next game. What's the last game? Hello. There was another break in recording. It is now 12:07 p.m. I took a roughly 15-minute break in which I ate some chicken, warm chicken, and some Greek salad. It was quite nice. The final video game to talk about is Infini, which I don't know when this one came out. I feel like I know the dates less often than I don't know them, which means more often than not I don't know the dates. Before I get into talking about the game, I have to thank my friend Scum for buying this game for me. Scum, SCUMM, known commonly for Scum's Fun Picks and The Cone Zone. So, yeah, thank you very much, Scum. This game's really good. I really appreciate it. I'll have to pay you back the favor at some point, or do you another favor, or just do you favors in general, because you're my friend. Infini is a puzzle game in which you fall from the top of the screen and you try to find a portal to go through. Initially, this is very, very simple. It involves just, you can slow or speed up your ascent, slow or speed up your descent, and you avoid moving obstacles, and you just try and kind of get through to the end. Though later, these mechanics are modified and become much more complex in terms of both your character's movement, you're allowed more directions of movement, you're allowed to change the flow of gravity, but also in its core gimmick in terms of camera controls, core mechanics, in terms of camera controls. You see, In the game, the bottom side of the screen wraps back around to the top, and the left side and right side wrap between each other. So if you move off the left, you come back out on the right. You are given the ability to zoom in or zoom out the camera with your player characters at a relative point it zooms into or out from. And everything, you can only be affected by what is in camera. So for instance, if you zoom way in, so you can't see the walls of a box you're in, you're then able to fall infinitely, though the walls of the box still exist outside the realm of the camera. I've tried to draw that in the top right, though it's sort of hard to describe without showing it. It's a pretty interesting puzzle game mechanic, and it feels like the sort of mechanic which is generated from someone thinking fairly hard about the established conventions of some games they like. And then thinking, oh, what if we could modify that? And then building a lot of puzzles out from it. Infini is a game with a fair bit of content. There's quite a lot of levels, and they all have unique gimmicks they all have unique mechanics. I'm calling them gimmicks, which is very rude of me. I learnt the word gimmicks from next to me, actually. There's a manual for the DS game Sonic Rush. That's the sound of me opening the DS case and getting the game out. Sonic Rush is pretty good. But it lists every level. It lists gimmicks. I'm trying to find the page. Yeah, how to play, gimmicks. There are various gimmicks on the field that will assist you in advancing in the act. Some of these invoke a gimmick jump, allowing you to perform aerial trick actions, page 12. Some of them are noticeable. Here are some that appear early in the game. The bungee rope. When you try to go down, it attaches to your leg and bounces you back high in the air. Yada yada, you get it. So I learnt, I guess, to call them gimmicks, which I think is funny. I think calling the game's mechanics gimmicks is funny in a glib kind of way. But no. Mechanically, I totally forgot what I was saying. Each level has different mechanics. And so they get a lot of worth out of these basic ideas of puzzles. I forget the name of the developer, which I'm sorry for. But the game is very interesting. I think what appeals to me most about Infini, though, is actually the presentation of it, which is something you might notice, that presentation in games matters a lot to me in a way that gameplay doesn't as much, though gameplay is still obviously fairly important. I think presentation and atmosphere is the bits that really get me. So that might make you wonder, why don't you make films or something? And to that end, I'm not exactly sure. But there's more to it than just atmosphere. I ought to know by now, but every time I feel like I get somewhere with that answer, it's not right. So I don't know. Anyway, Infini has an interesting visual style. It's predominantly it seems like drawings, and then they're scanned in. Some of it's painting. It's got a collage-y look. But I think what I appreciate about it, it's not a collage in a style which is immediately visually appealing. In fact, it's quite unkempt and strange looking. Things contrast each other in weird ways. It's muddy and strange, and there's kind of grotesque details in places where other games might not include that. And then some visual assets are just looped over and over. It's not Braid's method of watercolor painting, for instance, which tries to make a very cohesive image. Instead, it's using a collage of kind of paintings to give a almost disjointed feel at points. But in that, there's an overall binding quality to it. The strangeness of the art style, it's not right. That's not the right way of putting it. Despite the elements seeming like they would be disparate and clashing, it eventually forms together, and everything sort of bleeds out, all the colours, into each other enough that it forms this overall feeling. It's got this kind of muddiness to it, this kind of naturalness, which other games don't get as far in. Other games still feel in a way like they have elements of artifice, and Infini does too. I mean, that might just be inherent to the form, or close to inherent to the form. But it goes a long way to try and dispel that, and I find that really valuable, I think. This is moving further and further away from the mechanics of the game, but I also like the storytelling. It initially seems like it'll be much more confusing than it is. Spoilers, story-wise, for Infini, following this. If you're worried about spoilers, you probably aren't watching this far in the video. Anyway, Infini, you play as a personification of hope, or at very least a character named Hope, which is pretty easy to interpret as a personification of hope. You meet other personifications, like a dog named Poetry, and a sort of machine made of a bunch of different wheels and parts called Technology. It's, in that way, maybe slightly blunt, but also it does interesting things with these characters. Your character Hope gets lost in Infinity, which seems to be a world that is entirely recursive, and you can find more infinities within Infinity, but you cannot leave it back to the quote-unquote real world that you came from. I haven't actually finished Infini yet, so I don't know how this story resolves, but I think it doesn't try to portray these characters as one-note representations of what their personifications are. Instead, they are characters. They have defining sort of traits and qualities, and they sometimes get along with each other and sometimes don't, and there are reveals in the story. It does a personification thing, but it doesn't take the easy route out with it, where, yeah, things still happen, there's plot developments, characters actually change between levels, and that changes their abilities and movesets, so the player feels the way they change in a tangible sense. And as you go further on, the story sort of tangles in on itself more and more, and you get deeper and deeper into whatever's going on. There's a sense, even in the story, of a strangeness, but it's not just, I guess, in some ways. I think in some places the game is intentionally strange, but I don't condemn that by any means. In fact, I really like it. I think intentional strangeness is great and fun, and gets way too much of a bad rap. People are like, you always have to be strange for a purpose. And Infini isn't necessarily all the time, but it also doesn't play strangeness as its only card. It does really interesting things. I like how there are optional collectibles in levels which are like glyphs, and then you get them and it translates parts of language on these kind of lore tablets in a secret room. I think the game also values a lot, or gets a lot of value from being made in its own engine. Because it's not recognizably made in any other game engine, you can't pick up on the common faults of that game engine. You can't kind of exploit them or see the seams. It feels, in that way, a very full game, and it often surprised me. Like, for most of the game, and this is spoilers again, this game is pretty strictly 2D, but then it goes into having 3D segments, and it catches you off guard, because as a programmer, you're like, oh, well, not that I'm a programmer, but as somebody who plays games, you went, oh, I didn't think this game was capable of doing 3D. No, they were just withholding it from me for the sake of this reveal, and that's really great. That's using the form in interesting ways and playing off expectations. That's not the only thing that you can do with games, and I think I've put a lot of praise on stuff like that today, but I think Infini is a well-designed game that does interesting things and doesn't try and move with any sort of, I guess, crowd. It's a good game. I mean, if you like puzzle games, if you like games with very, very interesting presentation, you might really like Infini. It's not extremely vague, or it doesn't kind of... What am I trying to say? It's not extremely vague in the way that you might expect it to be, where you just get nothing, no answers out of it, and it's fully based on your interpretation, which would also be fine. But it gives you a lot to work with in terms of thinking about it and talking about it, and there's genuine character moments in it, and it's good work. I think Infini is a game that it keeps surprising me. It keeps doing interesting things. It's sometimes a little clunky, I will admit. Some of the puzzles are sort of based. You figure out what you want to do pretty quickly, and then you have to execute it, and that takes it's hard, but it also gets a lot out of its mechanics, and it does a lot of great stuff. So yeah, Infini's excellent. It's excellent and it's unique, and I might keep thinking about it for quite a while. At the very least, it's an interesting looking game. I don't know. I'm just saying the same thing over and over now. I also like this game partially because it's obscure. I don't know how many people played this, and I think that's kind of a shame. It's a game that deserves to be played more and talked about more because it's unique and interesting. And yeah, I don't know if this is even on itch. I think it might just be on Steam, which is strange as a modern indie game, but I guess I haven't looked. Okay. That concludes video games. Thank you very much. That was about 50 minutes of video games. This is definitely going to be longer than last year's. God damn. At least, hopefully it won't be like 3 hours. There are only 5 entries to go. The next section is on books, and I don't read that many books. I need to read more. I've bought myself books that I want to read. I'm enjoying them more. I'm currently reading House of Leaves, which I enjoy. I'm enjoying very, very much. I've also read this year, I recently read Picnic at Hanging Rock, and I've read The Lieutenant by Kate Grenville. But that's not important. This is about books from last year. And the books I read that I liked were The Things They Carried and by Tim O'Brien, and The Windup Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami, which are both pretty great novels. I read other books that year, but these are the ones that I think really stuck with me. It's not as many books as last year, because I also included other writing last year, and I would still do that, but I just didn't have a whole lot to talk about. I was very, very hard working all last year in terms of my my academic pursuits, which just means high school, and I'm very, very hard working this year. It's my final year of high school, so I'm trying to do really well, both for marks, but mostly for my own satisfaction, I guess, and because I like doing work, and I find that enriching in a way. Yes, so this is about books. And the first one I'm going to talk about is The Windup Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami, which is a book that I cannot accurately talk about in any way in this span of time that I'm going to sort of vaguely allot myself to talk about it, because it really is an epic. A lot of stuff happens in it. It's a book that you can't possibly spoil, or you can spoil it, but a lot goes on. It has a lot of depth and a lot of different directions that it moves in. It has a lot of textural depth. I say texture quite a lot when I'm describing things, and when I say that, I think I mean sort of the overall quality of the work. But it's hard to define that. I think other people have called it a je ne sais quoi. I might have just said that totally wrong. Wouldn't that be embarrassing? Not really, actually. It would give me an opportunity to learn the right one. But this book goes to a lot of places. It has a lot of different plot directions and things. It's not a book where all the events start at the start and end at the end. It's a book where some events start and they end like a third of the way in, but other events start a sixth of the way in and they last until the last quarter of the book. There's a bunch of different strands of stuff going on, and sometimes something will seem to end, but then it'll pop back up later for just a tiny bit. So in that way, it has a flow that's more like living life than it is like like a defined narrative. In a typical narrative, you have the first act set up and then the kind of final act conclusion. And I don't mean to say all other narratives in this book follow a 3-act structure, because that's completely untrue. But if you look at that 3-act structure, dictates a lot of stuff, whereas this one feels more like life in that things sort of come and go throughout it. It definitely has an overall arc, though. It's not a totally slice of life book. In fact, a lot of strange stuff happens in it over the course of it. But I think surreal books can still be slice of life, or surreal stories can still be slice of life. Slice of life is more like, it's not an exceptional thing for the characters. You can have slice of life in extremely strange settings. It just has to not be, the setting is just not exceptional to the character. Or maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. Anyway, the book the basic setup of the book, I suppose, is that the main character, whose name is, I think, Toru Okada, but I can't perfectly remember, lives in a house, and he lived there with his wife and his cat, and the cat goes missing, and shortly after his wife goes missing, and he's sort of living alone in his house, and this kind of atmosphere descends on him. This sort of, I don't know, I remember it as a sort of silvery grey sheen of mist over the house, and then he sort of sits in that for a while, and he sort of tentatively grows outwards, and he watches people, and he has a few conversations with a next door neighbor, and it's sort of very still for a long time. Like, ripples haven't started forming yet. But then things develop, and you get more characters introduced, and things push him onwards. As much as he pushes himself onwards too, he's not a character who's at the whims of the story. In fact, I feel like he makes a lot of decisions, but he's a character who follows the directions the things that are shown to him are going, which I think is a lesson that's relevant to living a life. You get kind of indications of where things might go that are shown to you by the world, and then you choose whether or not to take up those, or you follow what seems right to do. And I think that's a nice way to live, and I think that book the book says a lot about that. In general, I think the book has a fair bit to say about the way a life could or may perhaps ought to be lived. Not ought to be. I don't think it's a book that's trying to instruct you, but I think it's a book that's trying to show you in some ways that might be a way that things could happen. There's a lot of imagery in the book that's very original and sticks with me. I don't want to talk about it in too defined terms, because if I try and get into the nitty-gritty detail of the plot, then I'll get nowhere, because it's not a book I can discuss like that. But I like the way it looks back to the past often. There are these vignette flashbacks to World War II that are extremely brutal. They cast the past as this kind of hellscape. This war is a living nightmare. And I've never, I think, found descriptions of war as affecting as I did in this book. And it's difficult to say why. I've definitely been affected by descriptions of war, but there's a real sense of disgust to it when they look back. This kind of churning malaise. You got quite a few instances of that, and it never loses its quality. It always feels like that, no matter how many times you look back to World War II within the plot. I think there's some way Murakami writes about violence really gets it somehow. There's a moment in the plot in which the protagonist, after having spent a long time watching people, just sitting in a plaza, follows one person home that he has recognized from a point in his past. And he follows this person home, and they come to this very dark, empty house. And suddenly, I remember it as the protagonist just sees red and tries and just is extremely aggressively attacks this man and injures him and leaves him there. And then the story doesn't really mention it again. And that's such an assault on how you feel about this character in a way. And yet somehow the act of violence, which you think would shake the whole plot, it changes nothing. There's no repercussions of it. There's no need for repentance. It just happens, and it's this explosion in the middle of the book, which is never again addressed. And so it sort of feels encapsulated, but in another way, for the rest of the book, it feels like maybe it'll threaten to break out, and it's building pressure, but it doesn't. It's this just flash of light in the middle, and it's gone. You don't know if it happened or not. It's amazing. It's such an incredible moment in the story that I keep coming back to in my head. There's a lot of incredible moments. I think the description of the career that, if you can call it that, the career that the protagonist finds himself in, where he sort of eases the pain of others in a very metaphysical way, is very interesting and feels like it rings true. I can feel it ringing true in my head, but I don't know exactly why yet. And so this feels like a book I need to come back to multiple times as I accumulate experience within my own life, so that I might find or understand more details in it. I don't know. It might not be a book it's not, in the way I read it, a book that I tried deeply to understand or to thematically unpack. It was a book that I let wash over me. I think that's a very underrated way of interacting with media or fiction, just sort of letting it happen to you. And I always feel pretty good about things when I do it like that, unless the story sucks or the writing is bad, or I think the morals are in a bad place when it's being written. But I loved this book. It was very engrossing, despite being quite long. I read it quite quickly, and I never felt any problem with reading it. Almost all the imagery was extremely potent, and it felt, despite having seen things like it before, I could tell this felt sort of like an origin place, and if not an origin, at least an extremely good distillation of why those things existed in cliches, as not cliches, but reoccurring elements within the greater world of fiction. I think, to compare it to another, I guess, Japanese artist, Miyazaki, who has been talked about a lot, Hayao Miyazaki, does a similar thing in his depiction of sort of fairy tale cliches. The imagery of a wicked witch is sort of ubiquitous within fairy tales, but when he demonstrates it, in the way he directs his films to demonstrate magic, you can feel kind of the sense of threat in it, or why people might have been afraid of it, and why that cliche existed in the first place, or why that archetype existed in the first place. And I feel echoes of that in Murakami's work, or his own ability to take something that you might expect, and despite not really subverting it in a clear way, presenting it in a way that makes it feel different and feel original enough that it is its new thing. This book's really, really brilliant in that way, and it's brilliant in a lot of other ways too. I don't know, it has great moments, it has a great overall construction and feel. It's just a really, really excellent novel, and you should try reading it maybe, if you want to. Be warned, if you do read it, there's moments of both intense physical violence and mentions of sexual violence. So, yeah, and keep that in mind if you're planning to read it. I don't want you to go into something perhaps and get something that really harms you out of it. Like, take care of yourself, of course. That finishes talking about that book. The next book I don't have a drawing for. It's called The Things They Carried. Or was it What They Carried? Give me just a second. I'm going to check on my shelf. Yeah. Okay, it's called The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. And it's a book about the Vietnam War. It's a book that surrounds the Vietnam War. It shows the before the Vietnam War, the experiences of individuals, and during and after. And it's based to some degree on, it's possibly based to some degree on the real experiences of people within Vietnam. I believe the author was a Vietnam veteran himself, so in that context I really don't feel comfortable trying to do drawings of it. It's a book that surrounds the extreme suffering of a lot of real people, not just of the sides of the conflict mentioned in the book, but of everyone surrounding, I think, or many people surrounding who actually were affected by the conflict. And yeah, I can't draw that. My drawings I like them, but they're kind of silly in a lot of ways, and I don't want to make any light of those events. But it's an amazing book.
It's a collection of short stories in a way, but it's also not. The short stories play into each other and build off of each other in the way any really good collection does. It feels like a collection of things that you could read on your own, but you should read on their own, but you should read together, because they build an overall sense of understanding of what the book might be about. I think I interpreted it when I read the book as the kind of thematic declaration felt like you cannot understand war unless you've been in it. It is something so huge and so much bigger than the imaginings or vague sort of empathy of one person. It's the author questions their own ability to even write about it. People afterwards aren't able to explain it to each other. It's just this extreme force that there's no way to depict properly or discuss properly unless you're in it, and at which point you're feeling it, and you can just rely on the people around you to also be feeling it. And it doesn't in that way romanticize war so much as it observes it from a sort of a distance, and also from within it. I don't know what to say about the book. There's not a lot of moments I can specifically pinpoint, but the thought of the overall feeling of it was so great, and I think that's what's important. It's a book that's often brutal, very, very brutal, but I don't know. It's an amazing book. I feel like it gave me some perspective on things that I didn't necessarily have a great deal of perspective on before. It has a good voice. It's well written, obviously. I think, yeah. I read it last year for school. It was a book we studied, but we only had to read select stories from it. I went on to read the entire thing because I was very much enjoying it, and because I liked thinking about it. Yeah, I'm glad I did. I think the way it scales in and out is important too. And there are moments within it that I can feel empathy for. I don't want to say that you should come into the book expecting to read it and feel nothing for anyone. Of course you'll feel things, but overall the feeling of war is so intense that it's unrelatable. But there are moments I understand, a sense of despair at a feeling of obligation, in terms of conscription in the protagonist in the story On the Rainy River, which was early on, which is just amazingly written. I think descriptions of landscape really get to me, but I also can't quite understand them. I think that's amazing. I think kind of to have a book where the point is maybe you don't get it. Maybe nobody quite gets it. It feels like it would be despairing and fatalist almost, but it doesn't feel like it that. In reading it, it feels like it's more human than that. It's not trying to draw away. I don't know. This is a really fantastic book. If you're interested in my description at all, or if you're just interested in writing like this, or about this subject material, you might really like it. Yeah, that's what I think's worth saying about it. Thank you very much, Tim O'Brien, for writing a very good book. And that concludes books. 1 hour, 16 minutes, plus the roughly, I think, 50 minutes I recorded, so we've hit 2 hours. I said that earlier, so we're over 2 hours now. No, I recorded 1 hour and 5 before. Yikes, this is closing in on 2.5. Okay, so the final section is 3 more things. These are the films that I watched last year. I watched quite a lot of films. I really, really like films. I think they're I think I watch a lot of them, possibly because they feel less of a huge time investment than video games do. Most games that I want to play end up being quite long. I bought Yakuza 0 recently, which is, I think, quite a long game. And I don't know if I'll finish it. I really, really like it. I'm enjoying it a lot. But, yeah, who knows? Who knows if I'll finish that one? I don't have a huge amount of time with the amount I work. Maybe later in my life I'll play more video games, but at the moment I play a couple a year and I think very, very hard about them if I like them at all. Yeah, okay. Films. I like movies. I like calling them movies. I like pulling away the label of films, but I also often call them films. So there's not as much of a point to that, I guess. Yeah, I enjoy this medium. I think there are a lot of great films. I love visuals. I love the tones that films can communicate along with their storytelling. Okay, what's the first film? Oh no, the first film is Synecdoche, New York. This is another film I don't have any way to talk about in any constructed way because it's so huge and engrossing. I think the emotion I can most describe myself as having felt watching it is heartache. And I think that fits. I think the characters in the story are also feeling it often. I think just a sense of kind of horror and longing and empathy. Synecdoche, New York is a film a lot of people seem to think is very bleak and fatalist. Well, not fatalist, but bleak and about human separation and distance. But I didn't see it like that. I saw it as a film about life in general and the kind of experience of living and events affecting the future and how we see the present affecting it. And it's also about the pursuit of art and relationships and all sorts of stuff. And that kind of the passage of time is a big interest, but it goes all sorts of places. Children and homes and creation and all sorts of things. I said art already, so I didn't need to say creation again, but I like lists that have 3 things in them. Doing a 2-part list is not that interesting. Or it doesn't make you feel like you have a point. Anyway, God, how do I explain this movie? It follows the life mostly of one man named Caden, and the whole film exists in a kind of dreamish state where things kind of fall in and out of each other and time unspools on top of itself, and you seem to flash between reality and fantasy or a combination of the both, and all of them seem to have the exact same potency. They're not differentiated in a way, so it can be hard to tell what you're looking at, but that doesn't matter because all of them matter just as much, despite the idea that one is reality and one is the correct course of things. The movie eschews that in favor of moving between lots of ideas of what things are going on or displaying things in different ways. The character of Caden has a lot of health problems, or possibly just feels like he has a lot of health problems. It's hard to tell, but he seems to go through extremely rigorous treatment at some points in the film, and then it doesn't seem to affect him as much later on as he grows older. So you wonder, was what I was watching metaphor or reality? Or no, it's a kind of a combination of all of them. There's a lot of jokes in here, despite how wide-reaching and kind of affecting the film is. There's a lot of jokes that I thought were very funny. There's one I've drawn in the bottom right corner where Caden is in a plane and he's attached up to some sort of machine that's pumping as like an iron lung, and somebody just leans over to him and says, death comes quick, and it's very bleak, but it's also very funny, this sort of stranger leaning over to offer the worst possible remark at a time, just in a way that's so without so without restraint, that I think that was really lovely and funny. I felt a lot of heartache watching the film. I was quite affected by it. It's a movie that runs for a pretty long time, but is always engrossing. Visually, it's such a spectacle at points too, and such a spectacle in an interesting way. It's a marvel to me that the film got kind of funded for this much money, because it's extremely ambitious. Like, an enormous amount of stuff is happening. There's some of the drawings on this page. I don't know what I was trying to draw. I'm trying to look at one. There's one... I don't know what that is. It looks at me like the Earth, and then there's a person in the center of it, and a ring around him, and dots. I'm not sure what I was trying to draw there. Yeah, I think it's a great film. I feel like I'm falling to that as my final point on a lot of these, but it's because my thoughts aren't ultimately collected. If I had, like Hylics, a kind of idea of an essay I might write about the film in my head, or an idea about the game essay I might write in my head, I would be much more constructed in my thoughts on it. But Synecdoche in New York was something that affected me enough and was interesting enough to me and unique, and it worked in way. It was unique, but it also just well constructed and seemed to effectively deliver on everything it seemed to want to do. It was so amazing. I love the way it's kind of recursive at points. I think I've already used that word, but things appear at multiple levels of importance or size and go deeper and deeper into each other as the character constructs. For a play, he's trying to make a replica city. He eventually has to create a replica version of his play within that city, and then within that another one and another one, and it gets bigger and bigger, and it sprawls outwards until the end, in which it like everything from all the sides comes together into a point and then just disappears. It builds everything outwards, and then it just crushingly comes in with an incredible amount of force and pressure. I'm making hand gestures to try and show it, but you can't see it because this is an audio medium. Oh, this is an audio recording. It's amazing. It's an amazing film. I've never seen anything else quite like it. It's a film that a lot of people who love films really love, so, you know. But, yeah, a pretty amazing film. Watch it if you dare. I'm saying that like it's part of a horror anthology. Watch if you dare. That was a bad impression. Anyway, the next movie's slightly easier to talk about. It's Barton Fink by the Coen brothers. I don't know when this film came out. It is a film about a writer who made plays, who moves to Hollywood to try to make film, or try to make films. And he's very successful as a playwright, and then he moves and he suffers from something like writer's block, and he's in this horrible hotel. And I think the hotel and the setting is what sticks with me most about this film. The inside of the hotel is just melting. It really is melting in on itself. It's got the plaster, or the kind of plaster is dripping down the walls, and the poster keeps unfurling. He rolls it up. There's like mosquitoes buzzing around, and the bed is this perfect kind of those metal A-frames which seem to be built with the least amount of material you could possibly use to build a bed, and yet are just the loudest things imaginable when you lie on them. The door never feels like it closes correctly, and he's working away in this kind of bleak place, but it's not quite bleak. It's other films, I think, maybe not even lesser, but a different director when trying to demonstrate a space like this, or a place that's depressing in a way, would try to make it all grayed out and make there less color. Whereas in this film, the space seems almost oppressively rich. It's full of detail, and the colors are just deep and dark, and it feels like a weird melting dungeon. It's like, what's happening to this place? There's no one else here except, is it John Turturro? John Turturro playing a man next door who comes in and he sits with Barton Fink, and they talk a bit, and they seem to connect, and then in the end maybe they never connected at all, and maybe Barton just wanted to believe they connected. And it's not a film that's, I guess, somebody said it's not a light watch, but it's a watch that I really enjoyed. I'm not sure if it's not a hard watch. It's not a watch that tries to not draw something more out of you, but push you into a filmmaking style you're very uncomfortable with. It just does extremely interesting things, especially with its location. The outside in the days, the sun is just baking down directly, and it's not demonstrated as oppressive heat or anything. It's just everything is like harshly, evenly lit. And I've thought for a long time that sort of lighting is more depressing than any sort of clouded sky anyone has ever tried to make in a film. And people who keep representing kind of a scene that's meant to be awful, or like the destruction of the outside world, as just clouded skies. I mean, clouded skies are nice. When the sun is baking down, there's no escape from it, no shade. That's the worst. That's the bit where it feels like really the kind of wrath of God descending upon the world. Imagine if the sun never went down. That would be far worse than like a clouded sky, if we were just baked day in, day out by an oppressive, inescapable light. And it feels like that. It feels like that outside the hotel, and then inside the hotel, it's like this dank basement which is dripping, and there's sort of a plume of smoke in the lobby which seems unnaturally tall, reaching upwards. And in the evening, there's a line of shoes by the door which suggests people live there, but you never see them. It nails the feeling of a weird hotel, or just a weird place. And trying to kind of watching Barton Fink try to make something in a place like that, trying to create a piece of work that he's excited about or wants to make, but just his brain is a concrete block, and he just cannot move, and the whole world seems to disintegrate. Not disintegrate, that's the wrong term. That suggests ash, and the film's not really ashy. It's great. It's a great film. It feels relatable in its... Not relatable, but I feel like I can form an empathetic connection with its environments, both internal and external, and its characters. And it dramatizes a certain kind of feeling, this blocked up feeling, or you kind of hate going outside, but you kind of hate inside too. And you're trying to do something, but you can't do it. And you try to talk to people, and it seems like it might go okay, but then you realize after the fact maybe nothing happened at all between you. And I don't know, in that regard, I guess it's a very bleak movie. But it ends with a sort of resolution which feels like maybe you could leave. And it's never the idea that Barton Fink's situation is something the whole world of the film is like. He comes to Hollywood to pursue something, and when he comes to it, it's like this. He could leave, but he doesn't leave for whatever his reasons are. He brings himself to this point, which is awful, but he stays in it because he thinks he should be in it. Or I'm mixing my metaphors now, and I mixed them ever since I started saying that Barton Fink himself stays in the situation because he wants to. I don't think he wants to at a point, but he feels a sort of sense of obligation to. Maybe that's more like it. This is a great movie. You should watch this movie. I say that at the end of all of these. But yes, I think I also say at the end of all of them that I say it at the end of all of them. So, yeah, though, I like this movie. Hello, my recorder stopped working for some reason. I'm just recording from Audacity. But it just paused at the 1 hour 37 minute mark. Luckily, I lost barely anything. It was just me saying Barton Fink is a good movie and you might want to watch it. The final movie, and the final entry on this list, mercifully, this video is too long. I keep saying it, but I mean it. Too long for anybody to reasonably want to watch or listen to, is The Lighthouse, which I think is 2019, directed by Robert Eggers. Unfortunate last name. Eggers. Actually, that's a cool last name. It's breakfast related. And then it's starring Willem Dafoe and oh my god, how did I forget his name? What is his name? It'll come to me eventually. Anyway, this is a film in which two lighthouse keepers come to a lighthouse to look after it for a period of either weeks or months, I believe. And they expect a boat to come pick them up. And spoilers from here on out, obviously. And the boat seems to never come. At the point at which it becomes clear to the characters that the boat might not be coming, their sense of time within the movie really starts to fall apart. Like, you don't know what things are happening anymore. You don't know at what rate things are occurring or how large the gaps between any scene are. But things get worse and worse for these characters. They continue to try and uphold the lighthouse, but they get closer and closer to each other's throats. A general sense of doom falls over them. The general sense of doom is there from the start, but it gets much, much heavier as it goes on. I think the fog is a very good way of representing that visually, but it comes out in other ways too. Talk of curses and evils kind of permeate the lodge. It's a film that feels like it puts stock, or not stock, it's interested in the feeling that old nautical myths might have had. And so when it represents a mermaid, it's something kind of horrific, but it's also an object of lust, almost, or compulsion. The film is a lot, it seems like, about compulsion, or has a lot of interest in compulsion. There's a compulsion to the lighthouse, and you gotta stick to these sort of abstract rules, and like, don't kill a seabird, and there's it's just I think the film is strikingly visually beautiful. It's almost in a 1-to-1 aspect ratio, which I love because I like squares. And it's in black and white, which I love because I hate all color. And it's very striking a lot of the time. The way light sort of glistens off the water as white flecks on the black sea that disappears into the distance, and the sort of weathered wood of the lighthouse. They get so much detail and texture out of just a few settings, sort of rocks and sea and wood and stone. I've drawn a lot of scenes and little bits I remember here on this drawing. This film definitely has a sexual element to it. And I don't mean that in the way that it's like an erotic film in any way, but it is interested in sex, and I think that comes in part from its compulsion. Or not so much sex as maybe more like masturbation, and how that plays into its ideas of compulsion. Yeah. You've got the lighthouse. The light from the lighthouse is a sort of heat and warmth, but it's piercing. And I don't know. I haven't tried to interpret this movie in a great way, or in a large way. I think it's another thing I just let wash over me. But it was the sort of film that you're really transfixed on while it's on. And then afterwards, it feels like the house around you's been kind of transformed. It ends and the darkness seems a little bit different. I don't want to get sort of gesturing wildly in the air, sort of film critic about it, but it's a really wonderful movie. It's just got that great feeling. I spent time as a kid in beach houses and sort of by beaches and piers and stuff, and there's an interestingly relatable texture to how it demonstrates sea life or the life at the beaches. There's a kind of weatheredness of the wood. It reminds me of piers that I really love. And the rocks are sort of serrated edges and shadows form on the walls. I love, and some of the moments where Willem Dafoe rants and monologues, which have been talked about a lot, but there's a lighting on his face where the shadows kind of pool in and under his eyes. It's just lighting from underneath. But the black and white and the way it's shot make it so interesting to look at. it does so much with things that other films might not be able to pull off nearly as well or do as much with. It's a brilliantly constructed film, and I think it deserves probably almost all the praise it gets. It's got brilliant atmosphere. It's got, it's a great movie, man. People are making great stuff all the time. Did you know that? Even going back into the past, like I'm sure in like the early days of human civilization, some people were making some stuff that I would have thought is properly cool. I already like ancient pottery. I think cave paintings are great. I think there's a caveman out there who would wow me with his work. People have been making cool stuff forever and seem to want to continue making cool stuff for the foreseeable future, which is great for me because I love seeing the things people make. I'm excited to find more stuff that I like this year. The list might be even smaller next year as I refine my critical ability or my understanding of what it is specifically that resonates with me and what will continue to resonate with me into the future. I feel pretty good about the list of films here. I think there's 1 or 2 games that I might not have included in future. Let's say if I had perfect recall and I looked back on this year in 5-6 years time, I want the list I make to be able to represent what from that year was actually important or what I will continue to think about in subsequent years. And I think I've done an okay job of that here. And there's stuff in here that I will definitely continue to think about. Thumper, Hylics, probably the Murakami novel, probably something like Synecdoche, New York, I'll rewatch. Possibly Barton Fink, at least a little bit. In terms of music, I think King Krule, Man Alive. I think Zack Villere's Cardboard City. I think that's a pretty good spread of things. I think hard to know if Schlagenheim will stick with me, but great stuff this year. Great stuff last year, I mean. It's 2021 now. Every year feels like living in the future, and we are living in the future and the present, but the present's so small, it might be the future or it might be the past, and no one's quite sure about that. Something about particles. I don't know anything about physics on that level, so I can't make a joke about it. But there are very small things, and they seem to be moving in a weird way, and we're trying to figure that one out. I hope people have a okay year this year. If they're not, I hope an okay year comes to them soon. I hope things go okay. I'll see you eventually. I'll see you around. I'll see you next year. I'll see you sometime. Thank you very much. I hope you're well. Goodbye.